She had only 3 seconds to decide. Call the most dangerous man in Chicago, or wait to die in a locked bathroom as the madman smashed down the door. Selene Vale never imagined that the name she feared most in her life would be the only one that could save her. Lucien Moretti, the Dark King of Chicago. The man her father used to whisper a curse. But tonight, in the darkness and blood, she called him. And he came. But to be saved by a demon, was it any different from dying? Leave the name of the city you're watching in the comments. I want to know how far this story has progressed. Like and follow so you don't miss the ending. The bathroom tiles were cold against her knees. Selene Vale had been kneeling on that floor for what felt like an hour, though the clock on her phone said 11 minutes had passed since Damon put her face into the edge of the kitchen counter. 11 minutes. The left side of her lip had split clean through, and the blood was still moving, slow, dark, threading its way along the grout lines between the tiles like it had somewhere to be. She didn't cry. She'd learned not to cry in front of Damon a long time ago because crying made it worse, made him feel powerful. So she'd bitten down on her own cheek and walked, not ran, walked, because running made it worse too, to the bathroom and turned the lock. Now the door was shaking. "Selene!" His voice came through the wood in that particular register she'd come to dread. Low, almost conversational, like he was commenting on the weather. "Open the door, baby." She pressed her back against the wall between the toilet and the cabinet, knees pulled to her chest. Her phone was in her hand. The screen was cracked along one corner from where it had hit the floor earlier when he'd knocked it out of her hand the first time she'd tried to call someone. The crack split straight through her contacts app like a fault line. "I'm not mad." Another knock. Then the door shifted in its frame, and she heard the creak of wood under pressure. "I just want to talk." She knew what that meant. She opened her contacts with her thumb. Most of the names there were people who couldn't help her. Her mother was 3 states away and would spend 40 minutes crying and praying before doing anything useful. Her friend Kara had a boyfriend of her own and a history of staying out of things. Her coworker Jen would call the police, and the last time she'd called the police on Damon, he'd had a cousin on the force who showed up, laughed, and left. Her thumb moved through the list, past D's, past J's, deep into the L's. She almost kept scrolling. The name sat there like a stone. Lucien M. She had no idea how it had gotten into her phone. She had a memory, foggy and secondhand, of her father pressing a folded piece of paper into her palm 3 years ago at a family dinner that turned tense fast. "You keep this," he'd said, voice dropped below the table conversation. "You don't call it, you don't mention it, but you keep it." She'd put the number in her phone under a name she half invented and half remembered, and then she'd buried it under 17 months of other contacts and tried to forget her father ever said those words. Her father was dead now. The door shuttered. She heard the frame begin to give. Lucien M. Everything she knew about that name fit into a paragraph, and none of it was good. She'd heard it mentioned by her father in the same breath as words like untouchable and careful, and once, memorably, the kind of man who solves problems by removing them from the earth entirely. She'd heard it whispered at her father's wake by men in good suits who spoke in low voices and left before the food was served. She'd seen it in a newspaper once, in a sentence that included the phrase alleged ties to organized crime, and then immediately clarified that no charges had ever been filed. The door cracked along the bottom panel. Selene pressed call. It rang once. A pause. Not a voicemail pause, but the pause of a person who had picked up and was choosing whether to speak. Then, yes. One word, flat as pavement. The voice of someone who did not waste breath on pleasantries because pleasantries cost something, and this man did not spend unnecessarily. This is... Her voice broke. She cleared her throat. The door shuttered again, and the lock was starting to give. "My name is Selene Vale. My father was... I know who your father was." She swallowed. "I need..." The lock snapped. The door burst inward, and Damon Cross filled the frame, 6'2" and drunk and terrifying in the specific way of men who have never once been held accountable for anything. He saw the phone in her hand. His jaw tightened. 3 words. That's all she got. "Please, save me." Then Damon crossed the room in 2 steps, and the phone hit the tiles. The line didn't go dead immediately. That was the thing Selene wouldn't fully understand until much later. The line stayed open for another 47 seconds after the phone hit the floor, long enough to transmit the sound of a man's voice, low and ugly, saying things that would have been worth recording. Long enough for the man on the other end to hear everything he needed to hear. Then the line went dead. But by then, the call had already been answered in every way that mattered. Bam. She came to on the bathroom floor again. Different position this time. On her side, one arm pinned under her, cheek pressed to cold tile. Her vision was doing something strange at the edges, a kind of soft blur that she recognized as the aftermath of her head connecting with something solid. The light above the mirror was still on. She could hear Damon in the other room, the television, the particular thud of a bottle being set down on the kitchen table. She lay still and breathed and took inventory. Left eye was swelling. The lip had bled more. Her ribs screamed when she inhaled past a certain depth, which meant either badly bruised or cracked. She'd been here before and knew the difference was academic when you couldn't afford an ER visit. Her right hand was fine. Her left wrist ached in a way that said she'd tried to catch herself at some point without fully remembering it. She was alive. That was the inventory. Alive and intact and still in the apartment. She didn't move. 19 minutes later, the power went out. Not a flicker. Not a gradual dim. The building simply went dark and silent all at once. The television cut off mid-sentence. The refrigerator stopped its low hum. Even the streetlight glow from the window vanished. And in the sudden black, Selene heard Damon swear, heard the scrape of his chair, heard him moving toward the kitchen drawer where he kept a flashlight. He never reached it. The sound that came from the hallway outside the apartment was quiet, which was the wrong word but the only one that fit. She'd expected something dramatic. Shouting, the crash of a door coming off its hinges. What she heard instead was a series of small sounds in rapid succession. A muffled impact, something heavy settling against a wall. Footsteps. Not frantic, just steady and unhurried, like a man walking to a meeting he was not worried about being late for. Then her apartment door opened, slowly, deliberately, and Damon, who had never been afraid of anything in the 4 years she'd known him, said, "Who the—" He didn't finish. The overhead lights in the apartment came back on, or rather, someone turned on a flashlight and set it on the kitchen counter, pointing upward, which threw strange shadows across the ceiling and made the room look like the inside of something abandoned. Selene was standing in the bathroom doorway by then. She'd gotten to her feet because lying on the floor felt wrong. She was holding the edge of the doorframe with one hand. Her vision had cleared enough. There were 4 men in her apartment she didn't recognize. They were positioned with the specific, deliberate spacing of people who had been trained to fill a room efficiently. One near the door, one by the window, one at the far end near the hallway, and one standing behind a seated Damon, whose hands were zip-tied to the arms of his own kitchen chair with the kind of calm efficiency usually reserved for professionals. And then there was the 5th man. He was standing in the center of the room with his hands in the pockets of a black coat that probably cost more than 3 months of Selene's rent. He was somewhere in his mid-30s, though the stillness about him made him seem ageless in the way of things that had survived too much to be measured by years. His hair was dark and pushed back from a face that was all hard angles, sharp jaw, sharper eyes, the kind of bone structure that would have been called beautiful if it weren't attached to a man who currently looked like he was calculating something cold and necessary. His eyes moved to her face. He looked at her for exactly 3 seconds without speaking, and in those 3 seconds she felt something she couldn't name. Not quite fear, because fear had a specific temperature and this was something else, something with more pressure to it. "Selene Vale," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes?" she said. "Lucien Moretti." He didn't offer a hand. He didn't move at all. "You called me." "I did." "You know what that means." She swallowed. Her heart was doing something erratic and unhelpful. "My father said to call if I know what your father said." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "I'm asking if you know what it means. That you called. That I came." Selene looked at the 4 men positioned around her apartment. She looked at Damon, who was zip-tied to a chair and staring at the floor and breathing in the shallow, controlled way of someone trying very hard not to cry. She looked back at Lucien Moretti. "It means I owe you something," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not softness. She would learn he was not capable of softness. Not exactly. Not in the way that word usually meant. But something that might have been, in a different life, a form of respect. "It means you're in my world now," he said, "and my world doesn't have clean exits." They left the apartment 20 minutes later. She was allowed to take a bag. One bag, medium-sized. One of his men, the one near the door, whose name she later learned was Rafe, stood in the bedroom doorway while she packed, not watching exactly, but present in a way that made clear she was not to do anything unexpected. She took clothes, her documents, the small wooden box her father had left her, and her phone, which one of the other men had retrieved from the bathroom floor and placed on the bathroom sink without comment. The screen was cracked but functional. She didn't look at Damon on her way out. She heard his voice, one last time, low and shaking in a way she'd never heard from him before, say something directed at Lucien, something that included the word mine. Lucien stopped. He turned around very slowly, and he said quietly, almost gently, "No." That was all. Just that one word. But something in the delivery made the hair on Celine's arms rise, and she watched Damon's face go through 3 distinct changes in the span of 2 seconds. Anger, then confusion, then something that looked uncomfortably like the specific animal recognition of a creature that has finally, for the first time, understood that it is prey. Then Lucien turned back around and walked out, and Selene followed, and the door closed behind them. The car was black and long and silent. She sat in the back seat next to a window. Lucien sat on the opposite end of the seat, not touching her, not looking at her, studying his phone with the focused attention of a man for whom the world never stopped requiring decisions. Chicago moved past the windows in streaks of wet neon and dark water. It had been raining, she realized. The streets were glossy and black. Every light source doubled in the pavement's reflection. She'd lived in this city for 6 years. She'd grown up in this city's shadow, in a suburb that pretended to be separate from it. She had walked these streets, ridden these trains, paid for groceries in corner stores where the security cameras were always broken, and she had understood, in the abstract way that everyone who lives in a city understands its structure, that there were layers she'd never been part of. She was inside one of those layers now. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere safe." That's not an answer. He looked up from his phone then, not annoyed, but more like he was recalibrating something. "Blackthorn Manor. My estate. It's 30 minutes outside the city. And I'm supposed to just—" She stopped. There were several ways to finish that sentence, and none of them sounded anything other than desperate. "You're not a prisoner," he said. Not kindly, just factually. "You can leave whenever you choose, but if you leave tonight, you go back to what you came from, and the man in that apartment will have access to you again before morning." She turned back to the window. "I know you don't trust me," he continued, and she noted the absence of any plea or persuasion in his voice. He wasn't asking her to trust him. He was simply identifying a fact. "That's appropriate, but I was a friend of your father's and your father is dead, and when a dead man's daughter calls me from a bathroom floor, I come. That's how this works." "How did you know him?" A pause. "Your father helped me with something years ago, before things went the way they went." "What kind of something?" He looked at her again. "The kind you don't ask about." She nodded slowly. She understood that register. It was the same register her father had used whenever she asked about the years before she was born, before he became the quiet, careful, nervous man she'd grown up watching check his locks twice before bed. She didn't ask again. Blackthorn Manor was not what she'd expected, which was foolish in retrospect because she hadn't known what to expect. The word manor had suggested something from a different century, stone and ivy and Gothic towers. What she saw, when the car moved through the gated entrance and up a long drive bordered by manicured trees, was more like a fortress that had learned to dress like a house. 3 stories. Dark stone. More windows than seemed structurally necessary, each one reinforced in a way that caught the light slightly wrong. Security cameras at angles that suggested serious professional design. The gardens looked sculpted and expensive and also, somehow, designed to ensure that nothing could approach the building from the eastern side without being seen. She noticed these things because she was trying to notice everything. Cataloging felt like control when control was otherwise absent. They were met at the door by a woman of about 50 named Mrs. Harwell, who had the bearing of someone who had run a tight operation for decades and had opinions about the correct way to do most things. She looked at Celine's face, the swelling, the split lip, the general inventory of a hard night, and her expression communicated nothing, which was its own kind of professionalism. "East Wing," she said to Rafe, and Rafe moved. "She'll need a doctor tonight," Lucien said without breaking stride toward a set of double doors on the left. "Already called," said Mrs. Harwell. He nodded once and disappeared through the doors. Selene stood in the entrance hall and looked at the high ceiling and the dark oil paintings on the walls and the immaculate floor and thought, "What have I done?" The doctor came an hour later. Ribs were badly bruised, not cracked. The eye would heal. The lip would scar slightly, probably. He was clinical and unhurried and spoke to her directly rather than around her, which she appreciated. He left painkillers and an ice pack and instructions she immediately forgot. The room they'd given her was large and clean and cold, in the way of rooms that were maintained but not lived in. She sat on the edge of the bed and held the ice pack to her eye and tried to think. What she knew. She was in the home of a man who ran something that her father had been afraid of, and her father had not been easily frightened. She had no real options for going back tonight, or possibly for several nights. She had one bag and a cracked phone and bruised ribs. What she didn't know, everything else. She lay back against the pillow and stared at the ceiling and did not sleep for a long time. Morning came without announcement. She was still in her clothes from the night before. The ice pack had melted and soaked through to the pillow. She sat up carefully, testing her ribs, and looked out the tall window at a gray dawn over trimmed grass and stone walls, and beyond the walls, the beginning of a tree line dense enough to qualify as a forest. She went looking for a kitchen. It took her 2 wrong turns and one near encounter with a man she hadn't seen before, stationed at the end of a hallway, standing with the stillness of furniture, before she found a back staircase that led to a kitchen, larger and more professional-looking than most restaurants she'd worked in. Lucien was already there. He was standing at the counter with a coffee cup in one hand and a file folder open in front of him, and he was reading something in the flat-eyed way of a person who had been awake for a long time. He was still in the black coat, or maybe a different black coat, it was hard to tell, and there was something about the set of his shoulders that said he carried weight as a permanent condition. He didn't look up. "There's coffee," he said. She found a cup, poured it, stood on the opposite side of the island, and drank. He read for another minute and then closed the folder. "How are you feeling?" he said, and the question landed flat, like an item on a checklist. "Like someone hit my face into a counter." He looked up. "I know who Damon Cross is." "I figured. He's been sharing information with people I'm in conflict with for approximately 4 months. He said it the way someone says it might rain tomorrow. Just a statement, no particular weight on it. You were the mechanism. They were feeding him resources to keep you close." She set her coffee cup down. "What does that mean?" "It means that when they find out you're here, they'll want you back. Not for his benefit, for theirs." The kitchen was very quiet. Somewhere outside, a bird was doing something insistent and repetitive. "So I'm not just in your world now," she said slowly. "I'm a target in your world." "Yes. Because of something I didn't know anything about. That's how these things usually work." She looked at him. He looked back. His eyes in the morning light were a gray so pale they were almost silver, and they held the particular expression of someone who had delivered bad news enough times that the delivery had become its own kind of neutral. "What happens to Damon?" she said. Something in his face didn't change, exactly, but shifted in a way she couldn't read. "That's being handled," he said. "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." She understood, in that moment, that she was not going to get a direct answer to that question. And she understood further that the answer she wasn't getting was probably worse than any answer she might have expected. She picked up her coffee again. "What do you need from me?" she asked. He studied her for a moment, not the way Damon had studied her, with ownership, with hunger, more like the way a person studies a problem they haven't yet classified. "Nothing yet," he said. "Stay inside the estate for now. Don't use your phone for anything personal until we've secured the line. And don't wander into the West Wing. That's where my operations run, and you don't need to see that. I've worked in diners for 6 years, she said. I'm not fragile. I know. He picked up the folder again. But there's a difference between not fragile and ready. You're not ready. She didn't argue, partly because he was probably right, and partly because the way he said it, without condescension, just plain assessment, made it harder to push back against. She took her coffee and went back upstairs. The next 5 days were strange. The estate had a rhythm she slowly learned to read. Mrs. Harwell ran the domestic operations with the precision of someone who viewed disorder as a personal insult. Rafe moved through the building at regular intervals that she eventually recognized as security rounds. 2 other men, one named Torres, one she only ever heard called Briggs, came and went from the West Wing at irregular hours. Lucien himself was present, but rarely visible. She would see him at odd times, early morning in the kitchen with his files, once in the late evening in the garden, standing still in a way that looked like he'd forgotten to keep moving. He answered her questions when she asked them, which was more than she'd expected, though his answers were always the minimum required amount of information and never a word more. She was not a prisoner, but she understood the architecture of the situation well enough to know that free and safe were 2 different things, and she was currently only one of them. On the 5th day, she found a crack in Lucien's armor. She hadn't been looking for it. She was in the library, a real one, dark shelves and leather chairs and the smell of old paper, when she heard raised voices from somewhere behind the east wall. She shouldn't have listened. She listened anyway, because 6 years of working in diners had given her a highly calibrated sense for when a conversation mattered. Lucien's voice, tighter than she'd ever heard it. That wasn't the arrangement. Another voice, male, someone she didn't recognize. The circle doesn't care about your arrangements. They've moved up the timeline. By how much? 2 weeks. Maybe less. Silence. And the captain? Gone. We haven't found him. More silence. Then Lucien's voice again, quieter. Lock down the East Wing. Nobody in or out without my direct authorization. And the woman? A pause that lasted exactly 1 breath too long. She stays. She moved away from the wall before the conversation ended. She sat in one of the leather chairs and opened a book she wasn't reading and stared at the words and thought about a captain who had gone missing and a timeline that had moved up and the particular way Lucien's voice had changed on those last 2 words. She stays. Not she'll be fine or she'll leave soon or even keep her safe. Just she stays. Like she was already a piece of the board. Like the decision about her had been made without her input and filed somewhere and was now simply a fixed coordinate in a much larger calculation. She closed the book. 3 hours later, Mrs. Harwell knocked on her door. Mr. Moretti would like to see you, she said. West Wing. She'd been told not to go to the West Wing. Apparently that rule had changed. The West Wing was what she'd expected, and worse simultaneously. Operations ran from a long room lined with screens and maps and equipment she couldn't name. 3 people she'd never seen before were working at stations along the far wall. A tactical map of Chicago occupied the largest screen, its overlay marked with color-coded points she didn't have the context to interpret. Lucien was standing at the center of it with his arms folded, looking at the map like it had said something personally offensive to him. He turned when she entered. "Sit down," he said. Not unkindly, but direct. She sat. "I'm going to tell you some things," he said. "Not because I owe you an explanation, but because what's coming requires you to understand your position." Okay. The organization I'm in conflict with is called the Crimson Circle. They operate across 6 states and they run product, people, substances, weapons, through Chicago's port infrastructure. I've been disrupting that infrastructure for 18 months. He said it with no particular moral framing, no heroism, no apology. Just, this is what is happening. They've decided that disrupting me is the most efficient solution. By using Damon. By using Damon as one piece of a larger approach, yes. The man who fed Damon his instructions is a captain in my own organization named Holt, who sold that access 3 months ago and has since disappeared with a detailed map of this estate's security protocols. She absorbed that. So they know how to get in here. They know the protocols we were running 3 months ago. We've changed them. He paused. But they have resources, and they have a timeline, and they have Holt, Who knows how I think? That last part concerns me more than the rest. Why are you telling me this? He looked at her directly. Because if something happens here, I need you to know the shape of it. Not the details. You don't need the details. But the shape. So I can make decisions. So you can survive. He said it with the same flat clarity as everything else. You're not an operative. You're not trained, but you're not stupid. And you were your father's daughter, and that counts for something in my assessment of what you can handle. She held his gaze. What happened to my father? The room seemed to shift slightly. He made a choice, Lucien said after a moment, that put him between two things that don't allow for middle positions. He tried to stay in the middle anyway. A pause. He was wrong about the possibility. Did you? No. No hesitation. He was my friend. Whatever friend means in the kind of life I've led. She believed him. She wasn't sure why, except that his voice on that word, friend, was the first time she'd heard anything in his tone that cost him something to say. What do you need me to do? She asked. Nothing active. Stay in the areas I've designated. Follow instructions from Rafe and Torres. If an alarm sounds in the night, do not go to the windows. Go to the safe room at the end of the east hallway. Mrs. Harwell will show you where it is. And if something happens to you? He looked at her again. A long beat. Rafe has instructions. She nodded. She stood to leave. Selene. She turned back. He was looking at the map again. His profile against the screen light was all edges and geometry. Your father said you were stubborn, he said. He meant it as a concern. I find it useful. She didn't know what to do with that, so she left. That night she lay awake in the cold, clean room and listened to the estate and thought about her father, and about Damon Cross, who was out there somewhere in the city, and about a man named Holt, who had sold a map of this place to people who ran product through the port, and about the particular way Lucien had paused before saying she stays. She had called him for safety. She had found something considerably more complicated. And somewhere in the city below the darkened skyline, the Crimson Circle was moving its pieces across a board she was only just beginning to see. And they were moving faster than anyone in this building wanted to admit. She heard, somewhere deep in the West Wing, the sound of a phone ringing. Then Lucien's voice. One word, clipped and hard. Then silence. Then, faintly, the sound of rapid footsteps, and the particular sharp noise of a man being pulled from sleep, and the unmistakable tone of an organization shifting from alert to emergency. Selene sat up in the dark. Whatever Holt had told them, they weren't waiting 2 weeks. The alarm didn't sound. That was the first wrong thing. Selene had been sitting upright in the dark for 4 minutes, listening to the controlled chaos moving through the West Wing, the footsteps, the clipped voices, the particular sound of equipment being activated with urgency, and she kept waiting for an alarm. Something loud and declarative that would tell her the threat was real and immediate, and she should go to the safe room at the end of the east hallway like Lucien had instructed. No alarm came, which meant either there was no threat, or the threat was the kind you don't announce. She got up. She pulled on her jeans and her shoes in the dark, fingers working the laces by feel, and she stood at the edge of the room and listened. The activity in the West Wing had organized itself. Fewer footsteps now, more deliberate, the way movement sounds when it has a purpose instead of a panic. She heard a door close, then another, then Lucien's voice. Not the words, but the register, that flat, controlled cadence running at a frequency slightly tighter than usual. She went to her door and opened it an inch. Rafe was in the hallway. He was standing with his back to the wall 6 feet from her door, phone in hand, and he turned at the sound of the hinges with the fast, precise attention of someone operating on no sleep. Back inside, he said. What happened? Back inside, Ms. Vale. It's not a request. Not aggressive, just final. He had the manner of someone who had delivered a lot of final statements and found that the most effective ones didn't require volume. She looked at him for a moment. Then she stepped back and closed the door. She didn't go back to bed. She sat in the chair by the window with her feet on the floor and her hands in her lap and watched the gray pre-dawn outside and listened to the building and waited. At 6:47 in the morning, someone slid a folded note under her door. She crossed the room and picked it up. The handwriting was angular and compressed, like someone who had learned to write efficiently. Stay in room. breakfast at 8. L. She folded it back up and set it on the nightstand. She looked at it for a moment, then she picked up her phone and checked her messages. There was one she hadn't seen, sent at 2 in the morning from a number she didn't recognize. No name in the contact, just a number with a Chicago area code. The message read, "He's going to get you killed. You have 48 hours to make a different choice. Reply and I'll arrange pickup." She stared at the screen for a long time. Then she took a screenshot and turned the phone face down on the nightstand and went to wash her face. Breakfast was coffee and eggs and bread, served in a small room adjacent to the kitchen that she hadn't found on her own. Mrs. Harwell was present when Selene arrived. Lucien was not. He came in 7 minutes later. He was wearing a different shirt than yesterday, and his hair was damp, which meant he'd slept at some point, or at least showered, but the angle of his jaw said it hadn't been much. He sat down across from her, and Mrs. Harwell poured coffee and left without being asked. He looked at her face. She slid the phone across the table without saying anything. He looked at the screen. His expression didn't change, but she'd been watching him for 5 days, and she'd learned that his stillness wasn't absence. It was compression, like a structure that absorbed impact without visible deformation while the interior stress climbed. He set the phone down. "When did this come in?" 2 a.m. "You were awake. You were loud." Something that might have been the very beginning of a reaction crossed his face and then didn't. He picked up his coffee instead. "The number is burner. We won't trace it." "Who sent it?" "Someone who knows you're here and knows your number." He said it flatly. "That narrows the field." "Damon, possibly, or someone with access to Damon's contacts." He set the cup down. "It doesn't matter who sent it. It matters that they sent it, which means they're attempting to use you as a variable instead of an asset." She waited. "Meaning they want you scared and moving," he continued. "A person in motion is easier to intercept than a person behind these walls. So my options are stay here and hope Holt doesn't walk the circle straight through the front door, or leave and get picked up within 48 hours by people who already have a number for me." He looked at her directly. "Those are not equivalent risks. They feel equivalent from where I'm sitting." "I understand that." No apology in it, just acknowledgement. She pulled the phone back across the table. "What happened last night?" He was quiet for a moment. Not the careful quiet of someone deciding how much to say. More the reluctant quiet of someone who'd decided already and didn't like it. "We had a breach in communications," he said. "Internal. Someone on this estate passed a signal in the last 24 hours. The room was very still. "Someone on this estate," she repeated. "Not you." He said it without inflection, not reassuring her, just eliminating an irrelevant variable. "The pattern is consistent with the device that's been active for approximately 72 hours. It was using the estate's own network infrastructure to mask the frequency." "Holt?" "Holt is gone. But Holt had relationships here, loyalties that were misdirected." He picked up his fork and then set it down again, which was the closest to restlessness she'd seen from him. "I'm dealing with it." "Who is it?" "That's not your concern." "Someone on this estate is feeding my location to people who just offered me a 48-hour window to escape. I think that makes it at least somewhat my concern." He looked at her steadily. "When I know, I'll tell you what you need to know." "That's not—" "Selene." Her name in his mouth, quiet and precise. "I've been running operations in this city for 11 years. I've had people inside my organization before. I know how to handle it." A pause. "What I cannot handle is you making unilateral decisions based on incomplete information." She met his eyes. "Then give me complete information." The silence stretched between them like something physical. "After breakfast," he said. It wasn't everything. She'd known it wouldn't be. But in the West Wing operations room, with Torres at his station pretending not to listen, and Rafe standing near the door with the exact body language of someone who'd been told to be present but not involved, Lucien laid out the structure of what was happening with the efficiency of a man who had stopped softening things for people a long time ago. The Crimson Circle had been expanding for 3 years. Their Chicago operations ran through 6 port terminals and 4 distribution networks embedded in legitimate businesses. They moved people. That was the worst part of it. She could see it on the map, the routes marked in red. And they moved product, and they laundered money through a chain of property investments that reached into City Hall, into the police department, into the kind of offices that made oversight structurally impossible. Lucien had been dismantling it, piece by piece, quietly, using methods she didn't ask about, and he didn't volunteer. "Why?" she said. He looked at her. "Why are you dismantling it?" she said. "You run a criminal organization. Why does the circle bother you?" "I run a criminal organization," he said. "I don't run a humanitarian catastrophe." She thought about that. "That's a fine line." "Yes," he said. "It is." She looked at the map, at the red lines, at the blue points that she now understood to be Lucien's disruptions. Supply routes cut, assets seized, networks collapsed. 18 months of pressure applied with surgical patience. "They need you gone," she said. "They need me dead. Gone leaves variables." And Holt. Holt gave them two things. He moved to the screen and touched a point near the port district. The layout of the estate's security architecture, and an itemized list of my internal hierarchy, who reports to whom, who holds leverage over whom, who has done what, and can therefore be used. He paused. It took him 2 years to accumulate that. He spent all of it in approximately 3 weeks. For what? Lucien was quiet for a moment. "I haven't confirmed that yet." She heard what wasn't said in that. "But you have a theory." He turned to look at her. Something behind his eyes was doing something controlled and cold. "Yes," he said. He didn't elaborate. She understood that was a wall she wasn't going to move today. The man's name was Garrett, and she found out about him at 11 in the morning when she was walking back from the library and heard the sound of a door being opened with force, and then a voice, younger than she expected, shaking in that specific register of genuine fear, say, it wasn't, I only, then Lucien's voice, "Stop." She stopped walking too. She was 10 feet from the doorway of a room she'd passed a dozen times without it being open. It was open now, and through the gap she could see the edge of a chair, the back of a man's head, and the rigid posture of someone who had been seated by others rather than choosing to sit. Rafe was inside. Torres was inside. Lucien was standing with his arms at his sides, which she had learned was how he looked when he was most dangerous. Not arms crossed, not hands moving. Arms still, completely still, like a machine that had stopped performing any extraneous function in order to dedicate all resources to the problem in front of it. "Garrett," his voice was very quiet, "I'm going to ask you once more, and I need you to understand that the quality of what happens in the next 10 minutes depends entirely on whether you answer that question the way I already know the answer." A silence. "They have my sister." The man's voice broke on it. "They took her 6 weeks ago. They said they'd—" "I know," Lucien said. The silence that followed was different. She could feel it from the hallway. "You knew?" "I found out this morning." He moved. She could see the shift in the room's geometry without seeing him fully. "You should have come to me 6 weeks ago. They said They said you'd— I know what they said." Still quiet. Still flat. But there was something in it now that she couldn't entirely classify. "Where is she?" A pause. I gave them what they asked for and then they stopped. I don't have a contact. Think. I swear to you, I don't have— Garrett, the name like a period. Think about every interaction you've had, every handoff, every message. Where did the communication originate? Not what number, what platform, what methodology? A long silence. Then, there was a drop location, physical. I left what they wanted and picked up instructions. Near the port district, Pier 14. Lucien was quiet for a moment. "Rafe," he said. "Yeah," said Rafe. "Get me Pier 14 by nightfall." "On it." She moved away from the doorway then, quietly, back down the hall and into the library, where she sat in the leather chair and stared at the fireplace that hadn't been lit, and thought about a man named Garrett who had fed the Crimson Circle intelligence about this estate because they'd taken someone he loved, and thought about how that made him a traitor, and also, simultaneously and without contradiction, a person doing what anyone would do. She thought about what Lucien would do with that. She thought about what she would have done with that if someone had taken a person she loved and offered her a simple mechanism to get them back. She thought about her father. She stayed in the library for 2 hours. At 2 in the afternoon, the second message came. 36 hours now. We've moved up our own timeline. The offer won't hold past midnight tomorrow. Think about what he's going to do when it suits him to use you as a bargaining chip instead of a guest. She read it twice. Then she went looking for Lucien. She found him in the kitchen again. This version of the kitchen was afternoon light and coffee cold and operational. 3 people at the table she didn't recognize, papers and tablets spread out, a conversation that stopped when she walked in. She held up the phone. He looked at it, looked at the others, said, "Give us a minute." They gave them a minute. When the door closed, she set the phone on the counter and said, "They're using the same number. Burner or not, they want a response." He read it. His jaw did something tight and minimal. "Bargaining chip," she said. "That's their theory about your plans for me." "It's not my plan." "I know." She said it without thinking and then noted with some distant observation that she meant it. "But here's what I need to know." She looked at him directly. "Is there any version of what's coming where you trade me for operational advantage? Or for the circle backing off? Or for anything at all?" He held her gaze for a long moment. "No," he said. "Why not? I'm not your person. I'm not your operative. I called you from a bathroom floor and you came because you owed my father something, and now I'm an asset someone else wants. Why wouldn't you trade me?" He looked at her with those silver gray eyes, and something behind them was doing something she couldn't name. "Because I don't trade people," he said. "That's a line in the sand. It's the only line I've kept." He said it with no particular pride. Just, "This is the accounting. I've crossed most of the others. I haven't crossed that one." She held his gaze. She was looking for the performance in it, for the angle, the calculation, the place where it stopped being true and became useful. She had 6 years of diner experience and a lifetime of watching men say things they didn't mean, and she could usually find the seam. She couldn't find it. She took the phone back. "Okay," she said. "Don't respond to it." "I wasn't going to." "I know." He looked at the phone in her hand. "But I'm saying it anyway because I need you to understand that responding, even to refuse, gives them a data point. Data point meaning what? Meaning you're still accessible, meaning you're thinking about it." He paused. "Even a no is information." She pocketed the phone. "What happens tonight? Torres takes a team to Pier 14. If the drop location is real, we find the communication chain, and we find Garrett's sister." "And Garrett?" He looked at the table. "He stays here, under watch." "Not... No?" She exhaled. She hadn't realized until now how much weight she'd been holding in her chest against that answer. He noticed. Something shifted in his face. "He made choices that compromise this estate," he said. "There are consequences for that, but they don't extend to..." A pause. "I'm not arbitrary." She looked at him. "Are you ever not in control?" The question surprised him. She could see it, a small crack in the surface, there and gone in a breath. "Once or twice," he said. "It's never gone well." Walked up. She ate dinner alone in the small breakfast room. Mrs. Harwell brought food and poured water and left without conversation, and Selena was grateful for the quiet because the afternoon had been the kind of dense and relentless that required processing. She was on her second cup of water when Rafe appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Moretti wants you in the operations room," he said. "Now?" "5 minutes ago." She went. The operations room had a different atmosphere than the morning, tighter, darker, lit by screens. Torres was back. 2 men she'd never seen were at stations on the far wall. The tactical map of Chicago was active and alive with moving markers. Lucien was on the phone when she entered. He held up one finger, "Wait," and finished the conversation in 3 words and hung up. "Pier 14 was real," he said. "Torres found the drop point. Communication chain goes through 3 intermediaries and ends at a number registered to a logistics company that we've flagged as circle adjacent for 8 months. And Garrett's sister? We're working on that." He turned to the map. "But we also found something else." He touched a point near the north shore. 3 vehicles have been surveilling this road. the main approach to the estate, in rotating intervals for the past 36 hours. The room felt smaller suddenly. "They're already positioned," she said. "They're scouting." He turned back to her. "There's a difference. Scouting means they're preparing an approach, not executing one. We have time." "How much time?" He looked at her steadily. "Enough." She didn't push it. She looked at the map, at the red markers on the approach road, at the blue markers that represented Lucien's positions, at the sheer density of information on that screen that represented months of conflict rendered in colors and coordinates. "What do you need from me?" she asked. He opened his mouth. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. His face did something she'd never seen it do before. Something that lasted less than half a second, but was unmistakable because it was the first time she'd seen it. Shock, clean, unguarded, brief. He answered it. He said nothing for 12 seconds. She watched his face do its controlled nothing while he listened, and she watched the quality of that nothing change gradually. Not cracking, not showing, just changing, the way the surface of water changes when something moves beneath it. He lowered the phone. He looked at Torres. "Damon Cross is dead," he said. Torres said nothing. She heard her own breathing. Lucien turned to look at her, and his face was that flat controlled surface again, but she had seen the thing that moved underneath it for half a second, and she knew. "You ordered it," she said. It wasn't a question. He held her gaze. "Yes," he said. The word landed in the center of the room and sat there. She had known this was the answer. She had known it since that morning in the kitchen when she'd asked what happens to Damon, and he'd said that's being handled and looked at her in that specific way that communicated something he didn't want to say aloud. She had known and had filed it somewhere in the back of her chest where she kept the things she wasn't ready to look at yet. Now she was looking at it. "He was going to keep coming," Lucien said. "He had circle connections. He had your number. He knew what you looked like and where you worked and which 3 people you called when you were scared." "I know." "He was a liability. He was—" "I know." Her voice came out sharper than she intended. "I know why. I understand the logic. I understand that in your world that was the—" She stopped, breathed. "He was a person. He was a person who put his hands on you. That doesn't mean—" "No," he said. "It doesn't mean anything to do with the decision. I'm not telling you he deserved it. I'm telling you he was going to be used against you and against this operation and the calculus. Don't." Her voice was very flat. "Don't say calculus to me about a person's life." He stopped. They stood on opposite sides of the room, and the air between them was very full of something that wasn't resolved and wasn't going to be resolved tonight. "I need to go to my room," she said. He said nothing. She walked out. She made it to the east hallway before the shaking started. Not dramatic, not collapse, not tears. Just her hands, doing that fine tremor that she recognized from the bathroom floor of her apartment, her body processing something her mind was still pretending to evaluate rationally. She sat down on the floor with her back against the wall. Damon Cross was dead. She had called Lucien Moretti from a bathroom floor and said, "Please save me," and he had come and dismantled the situation and brought her here, and now the man who put her on that bathroom floor was dead because Lucien had decided he should be. And the terrifying thing, the thing she was sitting on the floor processing, was not that she felt horror. It was that she didn't. She felt something complicated. She felt the particular guilt of someone who recognizes that they're not experiencing the feeling they think they should. She felt the texture of 4 years with Damon Cross sitting in her chest like sediment. Every time she'd minimized, every time she'd explained, every time she'd convinced herself that the next month would be different. She felt, under all of it, something cold and honest that she didn't have a clean name for. She was still sitting there when she heard the footsteps. Not Rafe. Too light. Mrs. Harwell. The older woman appeared at the end of the hallway and took in Selene on the floor with the same expressionless competence she brought to everything. She sat down. Not beside Selene, 2 feet of space between them. Just sat down on the hallway floor in her immaculate clothes and looked at the opposite wall. They were quiet for a minute. "How long have you worked for him?" Selene asked. 14 years. "Is he—" She stopped. There was no clean way to ask what she was asking. Mrs. Harwell looked at the wall. "He has rules," she said. "More than people assume. They're not the same rules as most people's, but they exist and he keeps them." A pause. "Your father would have understood." "My father is dead." "Yes," said Mrs. Harwell. "I know." They sat in silence for another moment. "Go to bed," Mrs. Harwell said finally, not unkindly. "Tomorrow will be worse." She said it with the matter-of-fact certainty of someone who had been in this building long enough to know when the worst was still ahead. Selene got up. She went to bed. She lay in the dark for a long time. At some point, far past midnight, she heard it. Not from the west wing this time, but from outside. Distant, brief, almost gentle. The sound of a car on the approach road. Then another. Then the particular, unmistakable sound of the gate alarm. Not the full alarm Lucien had described, but a single short tone, like a sensor tripping. Then nothing. Then Rafe's voice in the hallway, low and urgent and no longer careful about whether she heard. "They're not scouting anymore." And somewhere in the West Wing, Lucien Moretti said something in a voice stripped of every remaining layer of control, flat and cold, and absolute as a man who has run out of time and chosen his answer. "Send them in." She didn't wait for Rafe to come to her door. She was already dressed, had never fully undressed, some instinct keeping her in jeans and boots even through the attempt at sleep. And she was in the hallway before the second alarm tone finished its single short note. The corridor was dim, running lights only, and the quality of the air had changed in a way she could feel before she could name, a kind of pressurized stillness, the building holding its breath. Rafe appeared at the far end of the hall, moving fast. "Safe room," he said. "Now." "How many?" He didn't answer, which was its own answer. "How many, Rafe?" "Move." He took her arm. Not rough, but with the unmistakable finality of someone who was not going to negotiate the next 20 seconds. "Safe room is behind the panel at the end of the East Hall. Mrs. Harwell will be there. You stay with her until I come for you personally. If anyone else comes through that door, you don't open it." "What about—" Lucien is handling the perimeter. His eyes were doing the focused, slightly inward thing she recognized from combat footage she'd seen once on a news program. Not adrenaline, something colder, a man running on compressed purpose. "Your job right now is to not be a problem." She let him move her to the end of the hall. The panel was a section of wall beside a tall cabinet that looked architectural, until Mrs. Harwell pressed 3 points on it in sequence, and a door-sized section swung inward. Behind it was a room the size of a large closet fitted with 2 chairs, a small monitor showing camera feeds from 6 angles around the estate, a first aid kit, a radio, water, and a steel door on the far wall that led somewhere else. Mrs. Harwell was already inside, sitting with the composure of a woman who had done this before. Rafe looked at Selene. "Don't open it," he said again. Then he pulled the panel closed, and she heard the lock engage. The monitor showed 6 feeds in low-light green. Feed 1, the front gate, which was open and wrong. The arm across the drive had been pushed aside, and one of the stone pillars on the left was cracked at its base, debris scattered across the gravel approach. Feed 2, the east garden, empty. Feed 3, the south wall, where 2 figures in dark gear were moving along the perimeter in a low, fast crouch. Feed 4, the main hall inside the estate, where 3 of Lucien's men were positioned behind overturned furniture with weapons drawn, facing the front entrance. Feed 5, the west wing corridor, dark and empty. Feed 6, the roof access stairwell, which showed the door hanging open at the top. She looked at Mrs. Harwell. "The roof door." "I see it," Mrs. Harwell said. They were both looking at the empty stairwell feed when the first explosion happened. It wasn't enormous, more contained, structural, the sound of it reaching them through 2 walls as a heavy compression rather than a bang. The monitor flickered. Feed 1 went to static. The remaining 5 stayed up, but 2 of them swung wildly, as if the cameras had been physically displaced. Then the shooting started. It came through the walls as a series of hard, flat sounds, rapid, overlapping, and then longer gaps, and then rapid again, the pattern of a firefight that had multiple engagements running simultaneously in different parts of the building. She had no reference for this, nothing in her life that provided a frame, but her body understood it instinctively, as this is very bad, and her pulse was doing something loud and insistent in her throat. Mrs. Harwell had the radio. She was speaking into it quietly, steadily. Status on East Wing. Status on East Wing. A pause. Static. Torres. Report. No response. She tried again. Static. The radio frequency, Selene said. They're jamming it, Mrs. Harwell said. No panic in her voice, just the flat acknowledgement of a complication being catalogued. On the monitor, feed 4, the main hall, showed one of Lucien's men going down. Not dramatically, just there and then on the floor, and the other 2 pulling back toward the corridor behind them. Selene sat in the chair and dug her hands into her knees and watched the monitor and breathed with the careful deliberateness of someone who understood that losing control right now would cost something she couldn't afford. The shooting went on for what felt like 20 minutes, but when she checked the clock on the monitor had been 4. Then it stopped. Not tapered. Stopped. A specific, decisive silence. She and Mrs. Harwell looked at each other. 30 seconds. A minute. Then footsteps in the hallway outside the panel. She tensed. Mrs. Harwell had her hand on something under her jacket. Selene registered that detail and filed it without surprise, because nothing about this building surprised her anymore. A knock. 3 rapid, 2 slow. Mrs. Harwell exhaled and pressed the panel release. Rafe stood in the doorway. He had blood on the left side of his neck, not arterial, a graze already darkening, and his breathing was the controlled rapid pattern of someone running on depleted reserves. "We're clear," he said. "For now." "Lucien," said Selene. "Operational." Rafe's jaw was tight. "He needs you in the West Wing." "Me specifically?" "You specifically." The West Wing looked like the aftermath of a decision made in a very short time. 3 men she didn't know were zip-tied to chairs in the corridor. Circle operatives, she understood, captured rather than killed. And the choice felt significant, though she didn't fully know why yet. Torres was at his station with a cut above his eye that he hadn't addressed, running his hands over the keyboard with the focused energy of someone trying to reconstruct something from damage. 2 of Lucien's men were moving through the main operations room, checking equipment, resetting things, doing a kind of forensic inventory. And Lucien was standing at the tactical map. He turned when she came in, and she read him in the 3 seconds before he spoke, unwounded or hiding it well. Coat gone, shirt sleeves pushed up, hands at his sides, jaw doing that compressed thing, eyes silver gray and very still. "Sit down," he said. "I'm fine standing." A beat. He let it go. "They used the roof access," he said, moving to the map. "The door was breached 40 minutes before the front gate. Someone gave them the code." She heard the weight in that. "Not Garrett," she said. "Garrett already gave them everything." "No," Lucien agreed. "Not Garrett." He touched a point on the map. Then he moved his hand slightly and touched another point. "We ran a communication scan after the breach report last night," he said. When Torres pulled the logs from the encrypted channel, the timestamps showed something inconsistent. He paused. His voice had that quality again. Not flat, exactly. Compressed, like words moving through something tight. The channel was accessed twice in the last 72 hours from inside this building. The first access was Garrett's device, which we'd already identified. The second... He stopped. She waited. The second access was from a device registered to this operations room. He turned to look at her directly. "One of the 5 people with authorized access to this terminal." Torres stopped typing. The room was very quiet. "Torres is cleared," Lucien continued. "He was with me during both access windows. Rafe is cleared. Mrs. Harwell has no operational access to this system." He looked at the map again. "Briggs has been with this organization for 7 years. He ran 3 operations for me in the last 18 months that required a level of strategic exposure that would have made him invaluable to the Circle if they'd been running him." She didn't say anything. "Briggs is the man who collected you from the East Garden 2 nights ago when you were walking after the kitchen incident," Lucien said, and she felt the information land in her chest with a specific cold weight. "He was the closest operative to your location for 40 minutes that night." "You think he was reporting on me?" "I think he's been reporting on everything." His voice had changed, not louder, just stripped of the final layer of neutrality. 7 years. He ran security on the estate redesign 8 months ago, which means the protocols he gave Holt were already partly his architecture, which means Holt and Briggs were working in conjunction and I missed it for... He stopped. She heard what it cost him to say that. Where is Briggs now? She asked. Rafe from the doorway. That's the problem. She turned. He was on the south perimeter during the engagement, Rafe said. He was reported at his position 12 minutes into the firefight. When it ended, he was gone. A pause. He took one of the secondary vehicles from the garage. We found it abandoned 3 miles down the access road. He ran, she said. He ran, Lucien confirmed. She looked at the tactical map, at the access road, at the city lights beyond the tree line, at the points marked red that had been moving closer for days. He told them when to come, she said. Briggs, not Holt. Holt gave them the architecture, but Briggs gave them the timing. Yes. Why tonight? Lucien was quiet for a moment. Because Garrett is here, and Garrett is alive. And if we find the communication chain through Pier 14, we find the link between Garrett's sister's location and the Circle's operational structure. Briggs knew we were running that tonight. He moved the timeline up to prevent it. She thought about that, about the layers of it. Did Torres find the chain? She asked. Torres looked up from his station. Most of it, he said. 3 of the 4 intermediaries. The 4th link drops into a dead address, but I can run a backtrack through the... How long? Lucien said. 2 hours, maybe 90 minutes. Lucien nodded once. He looked at Selene. You should go back to the East Wing. No. Selene, you said I'm not a prisoner. She looked at him directly. And you said my father's stubbornness was useful. So I'm staying here until you tell me what you're not telling me. He held her gaze. For a long moment, the only sound was Torres typing and the particular quiet of a building resettling after violence. Briggs knows you're here, Lucien said. I know. Briggs knows what you look like, how you move, and the fact that you matter enough for me to change my security protocols within 48 hours of your arrival. He paused. When the Circle receives his report, they will understand that you are not incidental. They will understand that I changed the way I operate this estate for a woman I've known for 5 days. She heard what he was saying underneath what he was saying. That tells them something about you, she said. Yes, that you have a vulnerability. Yes. The word sat there. She thought about Victor Draven. She'd found the name on the operational map 2 days ago and looked it up on her phone. The little she could find, mostly references by absence, a name that appeared in the margins of things rather than directly in them. The man at the center of the Crimson Circle, a man who had built an empire on the principle that every person in a position of power had exactly one thing they would not sacrifice, and that finding that thing was the only leverage you ever needed. I need to leave the estate, she said. No. Lucien. She stepped toward the map, toward him. If I'm here, I'm a target they can use against you. If I'm somewhere else, if you're somewhere else, you're a target without protection. His voice had an edge she hadn't heard before. Not anger, something rawer than anger. The Circle doesn't need you as leverage if they can simply remove you. Why would they remove me if they think I'm useful as... Because Victor Draven doesn't do leverage. He turned to face her fully, and for the first time she saw something in his face that he wasn't controlling. He did it once, 11 years ago. He held someone who mattered to someone who stood in his way. And what he learned from that, what he tells every operator in his organization, is that leverage is temporary. A person held over your head is only powerful until the person they're held over decides they're dispensable. The room was completely still. He doesn't take leverage anymore, Lucien said. He makes examples. She understood then, fully. The architecture of it. Why the text message had offered a 48-hour window, why the assault tonight had been structured the way it was, why Briggs had run instead of staying to finish what the attack started. They wanted me out of here, she said. The message, the 48 hours. They wanted me to leave the estate voluntarily so they could intercept you on this road. Yes. And when I didn't, they came here instead, to take you, or to demonstrate that they could. He looked at her steadily. Tonight was a message. The real operation is still coming. She sat down. She hadn't meant to. Her legs made the decision independently. And Garrett's sister, she said. We'll find her. If Torres gets the chain. When Torres gets the chain, she looked at the floor, at the polished concrete between her boots, at the faint dark mark near the wall that might have been from tonight, or from some previous night that she didn't know about. What do we do? She said. He was quiet for a moment. We finish what we started. We find the chain. We find Garrett's sister. We remove Victor Draven from the equation. Remove, she said. He didn't answer. She hadn't expected him to. Bob. Torres found the fourth link at 3:47 in the morning. The address was a warehouse in the Bridgeport neighborhood, 12 miles from the estate. The communication chain ran through 4 dead companies and terminated in a lease registered to a holding entity that Torres identified, after 40 minutes of tracing, as belonging to a logistics subsidiary of Veltran Industrial Group, which was one of the 6 companies on Lucien's tactical map flagged as Circle Infrastructure. Garrett's sister had been in that warehouse for 6 weeks. Garrett, when Rafe told him, made a sound she could hear from the hallway outside the room where he was being kept. Not words. Just a sound. The specific, terrible register of a person who has been carrying a weight so long that being told it might end almost breaks them faster than the weight itself. She was standing in the hall with her back against the wall when Lucien came out of the operations room. He looked at her, then at the closed door to Garrett's room. We move on the warehouse at first light, he said. I'm going. No. I'm going, Lucien. She said it without heat. Not because I want to participate in whatever happens when your people breach that building, because if I stay here and something goes wrong, I have no information and no options. I'm going. He looked at her for a long time. You stay in the vehicle, he said. Agreed. If the situation deteriorates, you do not exit the vehicle for any reason. Agreed. And you do what Rafe says. Immediately. Without discussion. Agreed. He held her gaze another second. Your father would have hated this. My father would have done the same thing, she said. Something moved through his face too quickly to read. Yes, he said. Probably. The warehouse in Bridgeport was a long, low building set back from a chain-link fence on a block that had 3 other identical buildings and no residential presence within 400 meters. At 5:20 in the morning, the sky was doing that pre-dawn thing where the black had lightened to the exact gray of nothing. No color, no warmth, just the absence of dark. She was in the second vehicle, a black SUV with Rafe at the wheel and one other man, Voss, in the front passenger seat. Lucien was in the first vehicle, which pulled past the fence line and stopped at a position she couldn't see from where they were parked. She watched the fence, the building, the light in one high window, yellow, dim, the kind of light that comes from a work lamp rather than an overhead fixture. Someone's in there, she said. Multiple someones, Rafe said without turning. She waited. At 5:26, the team moved. She watched it from behind glass, the choreography of it, 5 men moving along the fence line and through a side entrance that had apparently been unlocked by someone in advance, the whole thing taking less than 40 seconds from movement to disappearance. Then nothing visible. Then, from inside the building, the sounds she'd been learning to identify. Controlled, purposeful. The particular silence of people moving through a space they'd mapped in advance. Then a shout. Then a scuffle. Then what might have been a single shot, contained, close. Then nothing. Rafe's radio clicked. Clear, Torres's voice said. Come in. Rafe looked at her. Stay close. She almost said she'd agreed to stay in the vehicle, but the quality of his voice, not urgent, something worse, careful, made her get out. The warehouse smelled of industrial solvent and stale air, and something underneath that she identified viscerally before she could name it. Cold. Confinement. The specific smell of a space that had held a person for a long time. The girl, because she was barely older than a girl, 22 at most, small with her hair matted and her wrists showing the marks of restraints now removed, was sitting on a folding cot with a thermal blanket around her, and Torres crouching in front of her, speaking in the careful, deliberate tone of someone doing an assessment. She was shaking, not crying, just shaking, the full-body tremor of something that had been held for a long time releasing all at once. Selene crossed the floor without deciding to. She sat on the cot beside the girl and didn't touch her and didn't say anything immediately. Just put herself in the space, present, another body that was not a threat, and waited for the girl's breathing to register her presence. The girl looked at her. Her eyes were dry and exhausted and very aware. "Who are you?" she said. "Selene, I know your brother." Something broke open in the girl's face and then closed again with a speed that said she'd been controlling herself for 6 weeks, and the control was still operating on reflex. "Is Garrett?" "He's at the estate. He's safe." She felt Lucien behind her before she heard him, the change in the room's density. She looked back over her shoulder. He was standing 10 feet away watching her with the girl. His face was doing something very quiet. She turned back to the girl and kept talking. They were back at the estate by 8 in the morning, Garrett and his sister in a room together with the door closed, and the sound that came through the door was the specific kind of soundlessness that is louder than anything. Selene was in the kitchen with cold coffee she wasn't drinking when Lucien came in. He sat down across from her. They were quiet for a moment. "You were good with her," he said. "I've worked in diners for 6 years," she said. "You learn how to sit with people." He looked at his coffee. "I owe you something, an explanation." She waited. "When Briggs ran," he said slowly, "he took something, not equipment, not credentials." A pause. "He took a physical file, paper, the kind I keep for situations where digital records are a liability." His jaw was doing that tight thing. The file contained 3 things: the identity of a protected witness in a federal case connected to Veltran Industrial, the location of an asset I've been running in the Circle's distribution network for 14 months, and he stopped. She looked at him. "Your father's death," he said. "How it actually happened, not the version on the official record." The kitchen was very still. "What version is that?" she said. Her voice came out strange, flat in a way that was its own kind of warning. "The record says cardiac event. 53 years old. No suspicious circumstances." He held her gaze. "The actual circumstances are that your father was the protected witness. He had been cooperating with a federal investigation into Veltran for 18 months. 2 weeks before he was scheduled to testify, someone fed his identity to the Circle." The cold started at the base of her spine. "Someone in your organization," she said. "Yes. Briggs." "I didn't know that until this morning." His voice had a quality she hadn't heard from him. Not guilt, exactly. Something older. The weight of a thing that has been wrong for a long time in ways you couldn't see. "I knew the leak existed. I've been investigating it for 2 years. I didn't know it was Briggs until Torres pulled the full communication log this morning and found a thread that went back 4 years. She was gripping the edge of the table. She wasn't aware of having reached for it. "Your father called me," Lucien said. 48 hours before he died. I didn't take the call. I was in the middle of an operation, and I had 3 incoming calls that day, and I prioritized them incorrectly." A pause. "That's the part I won't make a cleaner version of." She stared at him. "He called you," she said. "Yes." 48 hours before. "Yes." "And you didn't answer." His face was absolutely still. "No." The kitchen held the silence for a long moment. She stood up. The chair scraped back and she stood with her hands at her sides and looked at the man across the table from her. The man who had come to her bathroom floor, who had carried her out of her old life, who had said, "I don't trade people with a conviction she'd believed," who had sat beside a dead man's daughter in the kitchen and told her half-truths with the precision of someone who knew exactly where the lines were. And she felt something she hadn't felt in 5 days. Not fear, not anger, betrayal. The specific, cold variety. "You knew who I was when I called," she said. "You knew my father died because of a leak in your organization. You knew—" Her voice was very controlled. "You knew all of this, and you brought me here, and you told me—" "I told you the truth," he said. "In the order I had it." "That is not the same thing." "No," he said. "It isn't. My father called you. He was scared, and he called you, and you didn't—" She stopped, breathed. The controlled breathing of a woman who had learned in a bathroom years ago that losing composure cost more than keeping it. "He trusted you." Yes. And you let him die. The word hit the room like a stone into still water. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He held the full weight of the statement without deflection, and she understood that this was what it looked like when Lucien Moretti accepted a thing. Not loudly, not with performance, just completely, the way a structure accepts a load. No bending, no cracking, but absorbing it into itself. Yes, he said. She walked out of the kitchen. She walked down the east hallway and through the door to the garden that she'd never used before, and she stood on the cold stone terrace in the early morning light with her arms wrapped around herself and looked at the tree line and breathed. She was standing there when her phone buzzed. Unknown number, different from the previous two. Chicago area code. She answered it without thinking. Ms. Vale. A man's voice, smooth, unhurried, with an accent she couldn't place beneath the careful, neutral pronunciation. My name is Victor Draven. I've been meaning to speak with you directly. She stopped breathing. I want you to know, Victor Draven said, that I have nothing against you personally. This is purely organizational. The man you're standing with burned 3 years of my infrastructure and killed 14 of my people, and I intend to finish the matter. The only question remaining is whether you're present for the conclusion. She looked at the tree line. What do you want? She said. I want Lucien Moretti in a room without his men or his weapons. I want that, and I want your cooperation in creating it, and in exchange you leave this situation entirely. Safe, clean, gone from Chicago if you want it. And if I don't cooperate? A pause. Not long. Then the conclusion I intend becomes considerably messier. For everyone in that building. Another pause. Including, I'm afraid, Garrett and his sister, who I understand have had a very difficult 6 weeks already. She stood on the cold terrace and held the phone and looked at the gray morning sky over the tree line. I need time to think, she said. You have 4 hours, Victor Draven said pleasantly. Then I'll take your silence as your answer and proceed accordingly. The line went dead. She stood on the terrace for a long time. She thought about her father, about a man who tried to stand in the middle of two things that don't allow for middle positions and was wrong about the possibility. She thought about Lucien Moretti, who hadn't answered his phone 48 hours before her father died and had been carrying that weight in the specific private way of someone who has decided they don't get to put it down. She thought about 4 hours. She thought about what it would mean to walk back inside and tell Lucien what had just happened. And she thought about what it would mean if she didn't. The stone under her feet was very cold. The morning light was the flat gray of a city that never quite got dark and never quite got bright. Somewhere beyond the wall, Chicago was waking up with no idea that any of this was happening, and she was standing on a terrace with a dead call on her phone and 4 hours to decide what kind of person she went back inside. That was the decision. Not heroic, not calculated, just the simple physical act of turning away from the tree line and walking back through the garden door into the warmth of the building. Her boots on the stone floor, the door closing behind her, the weight of the phone in her pocket like something alive. She found Lucien in the West Wing operations room. He was at the tactical map with Torres and Rafe. The three of them bent over something on the table with the focused quiet of men working a problem against a clock. He looked up when she came in, read her face in the way she'd learned he did, fast, total, like a scan rather than a look. Close the door, he said. She closed it. Victor Draven called me, she said. The room stopped. Rafe straightened. Torres's hands went still on the keyboard. Lucien didn't move. She pulled out the phone and set it on the table between them. 20 minutes ago, on the terrace. I was outside and I answered without checking the number. Lucien looked at the phone, then at her face. What did he say? She told him. All of it. The offer, the timeline, the 4 hours, the part about Garrett and his sister. She said it the way she'd learned to say difficult things. Flat, sequential, no editorializing, just the information in the order it came. When she finished, the room was quiet for a full 5 seconds. Then Rafe said, He has her number. Briggs, Lucien said. Briggs took the file and Briggs had her phone number from the security intake. Rafe's jaw was tight. He fed it to Draven before he ran. Lucien picked up the phone. He looked at the call log, set it back down. His hands on the table were very still, which she knew meant the opposite of stillness. "He wants me in a room," he said. "He wants you isolated, without support." She looked at him. "He thinks I'll give him that." "Will you?" The question came out quiet and direct, and she met it the same way. "I came back inside," she said. "That's your answer." Something in his face, there and gone. "He'll move on the estate if you don't respond," he said. "I know. He's not bluffing about Garrett. I know that too." She looked at the map, at the city laid out in its color-coded conflict. "So we don't give him 4 hours." Rafe looked at Lucien. Lucien looked at the map. "He'll be running the operation from somewhere central," Torres said from his station, already moving. "If he called her directly, he's close. He's not doing this remotely." "The steel factory," Lucien said. Torres stopped typing. Rafe went still. She looked between them. "You know the location. It's been his Chicago base for 2 years." Lucien moved to the map. He touched a point near the southeast waterfront, industrial district, the kind of neighborhood that looked abandoned from the outside and was not. "We've never moved on it because he keeps rotating his position. But if he's running a timed operation, he stays put," Rafe finished. "He stays put," Lucien confirmed. He looked at the map for 3 seconds. Then he turned and looked at her. "You're going to call him back," he said. "Okay. You're going to tell him you'll cooperate, that you'll bring me to a location he designates, unarmed, by noon." He won't believe that. He doesn't need to believe it completely. He needs to believe it enough to stay where he is for 2 hours. He looked at Torres. "How long to get the convoy staged?" 90 minutes, if we push." "Push." Torres was already moving. Lucien looked at her again. "You understand what you're agreeing to. You said I'm not a prisoner. You're also not an operative." "No." She held his gaze. "But I'm the only one Victor Draven will answer a call from right now." He held her gaze for a long moment. The tactical map hummed behind him, the city lit in blues and reds like something breathing. "If I tell you to stay in the vehicle," he said, "do you stay?" She thought about the warehouse in Bridgeport, about Garrett's sister on the cot. "Depends on what I see," she said honestly. His jaw shifted. "That's not—" "It's the most honest answer I have." She looked at him directly. "I'm not going to lie to you about it." Another long beat. "Stay close to Rafe," he said. She made the call at 9:47. Lucien stood 3 feet away in the operations room and listened, and Torres had the line monitored and recording, and she stood with the phone in her hand and waited for Victor Draven to answer. He picked up on the second ring. "Ms. Vale?" Same smooth cadence. No surprise. "I'll do it," she said. Her voice came out flat and convincing in the way of things she actually meant on some level. "But I need until noon." "May I ask what changed your mind?" She thought about her father on the bathroom floor of a cardiac event that wasn't. "He lied to me," she said, "about something important." A pause. She couldn't tell if he believed her. She wasn't sure it mattered. "Noon," Victor Draven said. "Bring him to the parking structure on South Wentworth, level 3. Come alone." "Agreed." He hung up. She looked at Lucien. "South Wentworth," Torres said immediately. "That's 6 blocks from the factory, staging position. He's not moving his base." "He'll have people at Wentworth," Rafe said, "to receive them before they reach the factory." "I know." Lucien was already moving. "That's fine." The convoy staged in 45 minutes. 3 vehicles, 7 men not counting Lucien and Rafe. Equipment she didn't ask about, loaded into the back of the second truck with the efficiency of people who had done this in worse conditions. Garrett and his sister were moved to the safe room with Mrs. Harwell and 2 men who were staying behind, not as a punishment, Rafe explained to her, but as a principle. You always protected the people who couldn't protect themselves first. She was given a vest. Heavy, hot, the kind of thing that changed how you breathed. Rafe helped her adjust the straps with the brisk practicality of someone for whom this was a mundane task. "It doesn't cover everything," he said. "I know. So don't get shot somewhere it doesn't cover." She looked at him. "That's the instruction?" "That's the instruction." She was in the 3rd vehicle with Rafe and Voss when the convoy moved at 11:15. They took the long route, not the access road, a farm track through the tree line that fed into a county road 2 miles east. Because the access road had been under observation, and Lucien had decided that the surveillance position would register the absence of activity as compliance rather than as threat. She watched the city come closer through the window. The particular way Chicago assembled itself at approach. The sprawl first, then the density, the stack of neighborhoods accumulating until the skyline broke the horizon with its indifferent permanence. Rafe drove without speaking. Voss checked his equipment twice, methodically, and then sat with the particular focused stillness of someone in a high state of readiness. The radio ran on a frequency she couldn't follow, voices cutting in and out with the clipped language of operational coordination. She looked at her hands in her lap. They were steady, which surprised her. She thought about her father calling a number 48 hours before he died and not getting an answer. She thought about a diner counter 6 years, the smell of coffee and grease, and the specific exhaustion of people who worked hard to stay exactly in place. She thought about a bathroom floor in an apartment she would never go back to. She thought about Lucien in the kitchen that first morning, the files spread on the counter, coffee in hand, the weight he carried with the absolute unsentimental practicality of someone who had decided that sentiment was a luxury he'd already spent. The city folded around the convoy. The parking structure on South Wentworth was 4 stories of poured concrete and fluorescent lighting and the smell of oil and stale exhaust. Level 3 was half empty at 11:45. It was an industrial district, foot traffic minimal, the kind of space that felt abandoned even when it wasn't. 2 vehicles were already there when she arrived. Rafe stopped their SUV at the level's entrance and let it idle. He looked at the parked cars, 2 black sedans, positions suggesting a pincer if someone walked between them, and then at her. Lucien's team is coming in from the east stairwell, he said. Torres has the building's external feeds. We have 4 minutes before they're positioned. She looked at the cars. A man got out of the nearer sedan and stood beside it. Early 40s, broad, wearing the specific kind of neutral clothing that was designed to be unremarkable. He looked at their vehicle and waited. He's alone, she said. He's not, Rafe said. She counted. The shadows in the far sedan, the concrete pillar at the structure's far end where the light didn't reach correctly, the stairwell door standing 6 inches open. 4 people minimum, she said. 5. Rafe's eyes moved. There's one on the level above us. See the gap in the wall structure? Someone's behind it. She looked. She saw it. The quality of the shadow was wrong. Her phone buzzed. Lucien. Positioned. Your call. She looked at Rafe. He looked at her. Stay close, he said. The second it moves. I know. She got out. The air on level 3 was cold and tasted of exhaust and concrete dust. Her boots on the painted floor made more sound than she wanted. She walked toward the man by the sedan at the pace of someone who had made a decision and was carrying it through. Not fast, not hesitant, the specific speed of someone who had committed. The man watched her come. Where is he? He said when she was 10 feet away. Coming. She stopped. I need to know Garrett and his sister are safe first. A beat. That's not... It's my condition. She looked at him steadily. I didn't come here to negotiate. I came here because Draven offered a clean exit, and I want a clean exit, but I need to know the people in that estate are safe before I deliver anything. He studied her. She let him study her. She had 6 years of reading people across a diner counter, and she read him back. Mid-level, operational rather than strategic, waiting for instructions rather than working from initiative. He was buying time, which meant he was communicating, which meant Draven was listening. She raised her voice slightly. Not dramatically, just enough. Victor, if you're monitoring this, and I know you are, then you know I came alone. I need the confirmation about Garrett, or this ends here. A 10-second silence. Then a phone rang in the nearer sedan. The man reached in and answered it and listened and handed it through the window to her. She took it. You're more resourceful than I expected, Victor Draven said. No smoothness now. Something more direct, the way a person sounds when they've decided to stop performing. Garrett and his sister are no longer my concern. They were a mechanism. The mechanism served its purpose. And Lucien? Bring him to me. He's not here. She kept her voice flat. I told you I needed until noon. That means he's still at the estate. I need 10 more minutes. A pause. She could hear him calculating. I'll give you 5, he said. And Ms. Vale, don't mistake my patience for credulity. I know you made contact with Moretti. I know he knows where I am. I've planned for that. Another pause. The question is whether you've planned for what happens when his assault on this location triggers the secondary devices I've had placed in this structure since 6 this morning. The cold moved through her in a wave. What devices? She said. Encouragement, Victor Draven said pleasantly. For everyone to stay focused. The call ended. She stood with the phone in her hand and looked at the man by the sedan, and for 1 second, one full, complete, clear second, she felt the specific terror of someone who has stepped onto a floor and felt it move. Then she turned around. Rafe was out of the vehicle already, moving toward her fast. Devices, she said. He has devices in this structure. He knew we were coming. Rafe's face did something rapid and controlled. He had the radio to his mouth before she finished the sentence. All units hold position. Possible IED in structure. Repeat, hold position. Lucien's voice on the radio, immediate. Where? Unknown. He said place since 0600. A half-second of silence that felt like much longer. Evacuate Selene, Lucien said. Negative, she said, loud enough for the radio to pick up. If I leave this level, they know we've pulled back and Draven moves. You don't know the device locations. Selene, I'm the only one he's talking to right now. She looked at the man by the sedan who was watching her with the attentive stillness of someone receiving instructions she couldn't hear. Let me keep him talking. 3 seconds. Torres, Lucien said on the radio. Run structural scan on South Wentworth parking, levels 1 through 4, flag any anomalous density readings in the concrete or support columns. Running, Torres said. You have 2 minutes, Lucien said to her, then you're out regardless. She handed the phone back to the man by the sedan. Tell him I need confirmation of the exit arrangement before I move, she said. Tell him I want it in writing. Stall. The man looked at her. Something in his face suggested he found her unexpectedly complicated. He made the call. Torres found the first device in 43 seconds, the second in 90. The third came back as anomalous density in the northeast support column of level 2, directly beneath where Lucien's team was staged. On the radio, controlled and rapid. Northeast column, level 2. Rafe, move Lucien's team to... The structure shook. Not level 3. Somewhere below and to the left, a contained blast that sent a compression wave through the concrete and knocked the fluorescent fixtures above her sideways, and filled the air with dust that materialized from nowhere, coating everything immediately in a fine gray film. The man by the sedan was moving, not toward her, toward the stairwell, running. The second sedan was already moving, reversing hard toward the east exit. She heard Lucien's voice on Rafe's radio. Level 2 is compromised. Move up. Then an impact so close and so hard that it wasn't a sound so much as a physical event. The floor under her feet lurching 6 inches to the right, her shoulder catching the concrete pillar behind her, the ringing that replaced every other sound for 3 seconds of white and nothing. She was on one knee on the floor. Rafe was 3 feet away. She couldn't hear him, but she could see his mouth moving, his hands reaching for her. The dust was so thick the fluorescence had become orange smears. She let him pull her up. Her hearing came back in pieces. First the high ring, then under it the crack of concrete settling, then shouting from somewhere below, then the radio. Lucien's voice. I'm clear, east stairwell. Torres, where is... Second device didn't fully trigger. Torres's voice strained. Partial detonation. Northeast column is compromised but holding. You need to move now. That column goes. Levels 2 and 3. Where is she? Lucien said. Level 3. Rafe had his mouth at the radio. Mobile, we're moving. East stairwell, now. Everyone converge east. They ran. The structure had changed. That was the only way to describe it. The geometry of the space was identical, but the quality had shifted. The way a building shifts when it's been struck. A new creak in the joints, a new angle to the dust falling from the ceiling. Every step she took, she could feel the floor through her boots differently than before. A slight flex that hadn't been there. And the part of her brain that cataloged danger was very loud about what that flex meant. Rafe was 3 feet ahead of her. Voss was behind. The east stairwell door was 40 feet away, and she could see two of Lucien's men already there, pulling it open, waving. 20 feet. 10. She came through the door, and the stairwell was dim and dusty, and Lucien was on the landing below, looking up, and she had 1 second of seeing his face. The controlled surface with something underneath it moving fast and cold, and very much not controlled, before he moved up the stairs toward her, and his hand closed on her arm with a grip that was not gentle. "Are you—" "I'm fine." The words came out in a voice that was not entirely steady. "I'm fine. The pillar—" "I know." He was looking at her face. Not her body, not for injury. Her face. "Can you move?" "Yes." "Then we move." He didn't let go of her arm. They went down the stairs fast, Rafe behind her, Voss bringing up the rear, 2 other men preceding them. And she focused on the stair edges and on Lucien's hand on her arm and on breathing, just breathing, the in and out of it. The ground-level exit opened onto an alley. The convoy vehicles had repositioned. Rafe on the radio had redirected them during the evacuation. And the black SUVs were 20 meters away with doors open. She was 10 feet from the vehicle when the shooting started. It came from the building across the alley. Upper floor, 2 positions, and the sound was very different from what she'd heard through walls at the estate. Out here it was immediate and physical, the air itself seeming to flinch with each report. And she was moving before she'd consciously decided to move, Lucien's hand on her arm transitioning from guidance to controlled force, pushing her down and forward. Return fire from Lucien's men, immediate, coordinated, 2 of them taking positions at the alley's concrete barriers with the trained efficiency of people who had wargamed this specific scenario. The distance to the SUV was 10 feet, 8, 6. A man came out of the building's ground floor door 15 feet ahead, and Rafe put him down before she'd fully registered his presence. 4 feet. She was in the vehicle. Lucien was in the vehicle. The door closed and the SUV was moving before the latch fully engaged. She sat with her back against the seat and her hands on her knees and breathed. Lucien was doing a check, his hands moving over his own arms and torso with the practiced efficiency of someone running a damage report. He reached the left side of his jacket and she saw the dark patch that she'd been trying not to look at since the stairwell. "You're hit," she said. "Graze," he said. "Let me—" "It's fine. Let me look at it." She didn't ask twice. She reached across and pulled the jacket aside, and the graze was along the left ribs. Deep enough, bleeding slow and continuous, not arterial. She pressed her palm against it, felt him control his breathing against the pain. "That's not fine," she said. "It's manageable." His voice was tight. "Selene, you don't get to tell me to stay in the vehicle and then pretend you're not bleeding." She kept pressure on it. Her hands were steady. She noticed that and filed it somewhere strange. He looked at her. "The factory," he said, and his voice had something in it that she'd never heard before. Not weakness, something more like the specific concentration of a man narrowing everything down to what matters. Draven wasn't at Wentworth. He was never coming to Wentworth. The whole thing was a positioning play, she said. He wanted us away from the estate. He wanted the convoy committed to the South District while his real team moved on Blackthorn. He pressed his own hand over hers against his ribs. "Mrs. Harwell and the 2 men I left. And Garrett." The cold came back. "Torres," Rafe said from the front seat, radio already raised. "What's the status at the estate?" Static. Then Torres's voice stripped of its usual operational calm. "We've got inbound on the estate, 3 vehicles. They're already through the gate." She looked at Lucien. His face was the stillest she'd ever seen it. "Turn around," he said to Rafe. "We're 12 miles. Turn around. Flat. Absolute." The voice of a man who has reduced the entire world to a single next action. "And get me Torres on a direct line. Now." The SUV cut across 2 lanes and the city blurred past the windows, and she kept her palm pressed against his side and felt his heartbeat through her hand. Fast, hard, the heartbeat of a man running on the edge of something. And she looked at his face in profile against the window and thought about a woman named Mrs. Harwell, sitting in a safe room with a radio that might not be working, and a man named Garrett who had already been through things no one should go through. The radio crackled. "Torres. They're in the building. Estate is breached. I have eyes on 3 operatives in the main hall. Mrs. Harwell and the others have gone to the safe room. Garrett's room is—" A beat. "Garrett's room is open. Lucien closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. "Where is Garrett?" he said, a pause that was too long. "He's in the main hall," Torres said. He came out of the room. "He's in the main hall and he's standing in front of the operatives, and I don't know if he... Is he armed?" "No." "Is he talking?" "Yes." Torres's voice was strange. "He's talking to them. He's..." A longer pause. "Lucien, I think he's trying to negotiate." Lucien opened his eyes. She looked at his face and saw, for the first time since she'd met him, the specific expression of a man who is running out of options and knows it. "How far?" he said to Rafe. 9 minutes. Maybe 8 if... 8, Lucien said. He looked at Torres on the radio. "Can you isolate Draven's position? He's not at Wentworth, and he's not at the estate. He'll be running this from the factory. I need the frequency he's using to coordinate. He called Selene from a Chicago number, burner, but the signal has to route through something local. He's been in the city for at least 48 hours to have placed the devices, run every burner activation in the South Waterfront District in the last 48 hours, and cross-reference against the call log from her phone." "That's... Yes, I can run that. Give me 4 minutes." "You have 2. She watched the city move past the windows and kept her hand against his side and counted the seconds. The factory was the endgame. She understood that. Whatever happened at the estate in the next 8 minutes was Draven's mechanism, a distraction, a pressure point, a demonstration that he could reach anywhere Lucien tried to defend. The real conclusion was always going to be Lucien and Victor Draven in a room together. What she didn't know yet, what she was still working through in the part of her mind that ran underneath everything else, was whether she'd be in that room too, and what she was capable of, if she was. The SUV accelerated through a yellow light, and the city blurred, and the radio crackled with Torres's voice beginning to find the frequency, and Lucien's hand was still over hers against his ribs, and she could feel the warmth of the blood there, and the steadiness of his breath, and she thought about the kind of person she'd been on a bathroom floor 8 days ago, and the kind of person she was becoming in this vehicle on this road, moving toward a burning point that neither of them could walk away from without cost. 8 minutes. 8 minutes to Blackthorn. And somewhere in an industrial building on the southeast waterfront, Victor Draven was watching a screen that showed everything falling exactly where he'd placed it, except for one variable he hadn't fully calculated. The woman who came back inside. Torres's voice hit the radio with the particular tone of someone who has found the needle. "I have him. South Waterfront, Pier District. The signal is bouncing through a relay at the old Kellerman Steel facility. That's..." "I know what that is," Lucien said. His voice had gone somewhere new. She'd heard him flat and controlled and compressed and cold. She'd heard him stripped down to essentials. She had not heard him like this, like a man who has finally found the fixed point he's been looking for and is pointing everything he has directly at it. "Torres," he said, "get me a layout of the Kellerman facility. Every entrance, every internal structure, every elevation." A pause. "We go to the estate first, then we finish it." The radio ran with coordinates and cross-traffic. The city moved past. She kept her hand where it was. And when Lucien turned to look at her in the moving dark of the vehicle, she did not look away, and neither did he. And between them was the particular silence of two people who have run out of versions of themselves that don't include this moment, and the next moment, and whatever comes after the fire goes out, and the city is still there, and you have to decide who you are. The estate came into view at the top of the drive, and Selene saw the light before she saw the damage. Not fire, not yet, but the particular quality of light that precedes it, a warmth in the wrong windows, a glow where glass had been broken, and something inside was burning slow. The front gate was open, and one of the stone pillars was cracked at the base, same as the night before, and she thought distantly that they kept breaking the same things. Rafe had the vehicle stopped before Lucien spoke. 3 circle operatives were visible from the drive, 2 at the main entrance, 1 at the east corner. Lucien's 2 remaining men at the estate had engaged them from inside, which meant the ground floor was a contested space, and Mrs. Harwell and the safe room were somewhere between the fighting and whatever Garrett had decided to do with himself in the main hall. "Garrett is still talking," Torres said on the radio. "I've still got eyes on the hall camera. He's sitting on the floor. The operative is standing over him." Armed, Rafe said. Yes. She looked at Lucien. His hand was still pressed to his side. In the vehicle's interior light, the dark patch on his shirt had not grown significantly. The graze was bleeding slow, which meant manageable, which did not mean nothing. He was looking at the estate with the expression of a man running geometry. East entrance, he said to Rafe, through the garden. They'll have the front and south covered, but the east garden wall is blind from the main approach. He looked at Voss. You take the front position with Reyes, draw their attention on the approach side. He looked at her. I'm coming in the east garden with you. Selene. Garrett came out of that room because he thought he could do something useful, she said. He was wrong, but the instinct wasn't. I'm not sitting in a vehicle while you'll stay directly behind me, he said. Flat, final. Not a negotiation, an equation. If I stop, you stop. If I go down, you go to the safe room and you do not come back out. If you go down, promise me that. She looked at him. His face in the low light was all angles and controlled pain and the particular quality of a man who has stripped away every non-essential thing and arrived at what actually matters to him. Okay, she said. He held her gaze 1 second longer than necessary. Then he opened the door. The east garden in the dark was very cold and very quiet, in the specific way of spaces where violence had been and hadn't quite finished. The grass was wet. Their footsteps were careful. The wall Lucien had described as blind was a stone structure 12 feet high with ivy that had grown into genuine handholds, and she followed him over it with hands that bled slightly from the stone's edges and did not care. The east entrance was a service door recessed into the building's side. Locked. Lucien produced a key from somewhere inside his coat, and she noted distantly that he'd thought to bring his keys to a firefight, which told her something about how he moved through the world. Inside, the smell of the building, smoke-laced now, and the distant sound of voices. 2 men at the front of the house doing something that involved furniture. No one in the east corridor. They moved through the kitchen, through the back hallway, toward the main hall. Lucien stopped at the corner. She stopped behind him and looked around his shoulder. The main hall was lit by 2 standing lamps, both undisturbed, which gave the scene a strange domestic quality against everything else. The tactical map she'd been staring at for a week was still running on the screen in the west wing doorway, its blue and red points moving with automated patience through a conflict that was almost over one way or another. Garrett was on the floor, as Torres had said, sitting with his knees up and his back against the base of the staircase, hands visible, unhurried. He looked exhausted in a way that went past physical, the kind of exhaustion that comes from 6 weeks of guilt detonating all at once. The operative standing over him was a man she hadn't seen before, mid-40s, deliberate in his movements, holding a weapon with the bored efficiency of someone doing a job. He had an earpiece. He was receiving instructions. She watched Lucien track the angles, the operative's position relative to Garrett, the distance to the staircase, the 2 doorways on the far side of the hall. Then Garrett looked up, directly at the corner where they were standing. He didn't react visibly, barely a shift in his eyes, a fractional thing, but he'd seen them. She watched him process it, watched him decide. He looked back at the operative and said, "Can I ask you something?" The operative looked down at him with the expression of someone who has been doing an unpleasant job and is waiting for it to end. "My sister," Garrett said. "Is she actually safe? You said she was safe." "She's fine," the operative said, the dismissive tone of someone managing a variable. "I need you to confirm that. I need to hear it specifically." Garrett kept his voice level and dull, the voice of a man draining the room of urgency. "Because if she's not, there's nothing you can do to me that changes anything. But if she is, she's fine." Impatient now. I said, Lucien moved. She had been watching him, but she still almost missed the initiation. It was that compressed, that immediate, no wind-up, no preparatory signal, simply standing still and then moving at a velocity that the space between the corner and the operative seemed to have no choice but to accommodate. The operative turned at the sound of footsteps. He turned fast, and he was trained, and his weapon came up with professional speed. It wasn't fast enough. Lucien took the weapon arm at the wrist and elbow simultaneously, applied leverage that made the man's body follow the direction of least resistance, which was down and forward, and controlled the descent with the cold efficiency of someone who had done this so many times it had become a physical language. The weapon hit the floor. The operative's face hit the floor a fraction of a second later, and Lucien's knee was in his back and the man was done. 4 seconds. Garrett was on his feet already. She crossed the hall and got the weapon from the floor, because it was there, and it seemed like the kind of thing that shouldn't be left on the floor, and she held it with both hands the way she'd seen Rafe hold one, and tried to look like she knew what she was doing with it. Garrett looked at her. "My sister." "Safe room," Lucien said, already moving toward the west wing. "East corridor behind the panel. Go. Bring her out when this is over." Garrett went. She looked at Lucien. He had zip-tied the operative's wrists from somewhere. He produced zip ties the way other men produced pens, she thought, and the absurdity of that thought told her something about the state of her own adrenaline. And he was standing with his hand pressed to his side again. "How bad?" she said. "The same as before." "That's not... We need to clear the front rooms." He looked at her, at the weapon in her hands. Something in his face moved. "Keep the safety on until you don't." She looked at the weapon, found the safety, left it where it was. They went forward. Chut. The front rooms took 11 minutes. Voss and Reyes had drawn 3 of the operatives to the main entrance and pinned them against the outside of the building, which left 2 inside, yes, one in the dining room, one at the base of the main staircase. And Lucien took them both with the remorseless efficiency of a man who has reached the part of the night where there is no patience left for anything other than conclusion. She was not useless. That surprised her. She stayed where he put her, moved when he moved, covered the angles he indicated with the weapon she was holding with both hands and had not fired. When the second operative tried to move through a doorway she was covering, she said "Stop" in a voice she did not entirely recognize as her own, and he stopped. Rafe came through the front entrance at minute 9. He looked at the cleared rooms. At her. At Lucien's side. "Medic in the second vehicle," he said. "After," Lucien said. "Lucien, after." He was already looking at his phone. Torres on the line. "Status," Torres's voice. 4 operatives secured her down at the estate. 2 circle-side vehicles in the drive. 1 fled on foot. Draven's signal is still active at Kellerman. He hasn't moved. "He's waiting," Rafe said. "He's watching," Lucien corrected. "He has eyes on this somehow. He knows the estate is cleared." He looked at the tactical map still running in the west wing doorway. Its patient geometry unchanged, the city still laid out in blue and red. "He knows we're coming." A silence. "Then we go," she said. Both men looked at her. "He's been 3 steps ahead this entire time because he's been reacting to us, reacting to him," she said. "The moment we sit here and consolidate is the moment he repositions. You said it yourself, he stays put when he's running a timed operation. He built tonight around a timeline. That timeline is broken now." She looked at Lucien. "He doesn't have a clean exit from the factory if we move in the next 20 minutes. After that..." "She's right," Torres said on the phone. Lucien looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Rafe. "Get the medic," he said. 4 minutes. The medic was a compact woman named Chen, who worked on Lucien's side in the second vehicle's back seat, with the focused silence of someone who had patched worse in worse conditions. The graze was deep enough to need closure. She used strips and pressure tape, not stitches, because there wasn't time, and Lucien sat through it without sound, which told Selene more about his tolerance for pain than anything else she'd observed. Chen looked at Selene when she finished with Lucien. At her hands, where the stone wall's edges had opened small cuts across her palms. "I'm fine," Selene said. Chen cleaned her hands anyway, briskly, without commentary. The convoy reformed and moved at 12:47 in the morning. The Kellerman steel facility was the kind of place that looked like what it was. Abandoned industrial infrastructure that had been something important once and had declined into a kind of monument to its own past. 3 buildings, the main one 6 stories of brick and broken windows, catwalks visible through gaps in the walls. The whole structure overlooking the waterfront with the particular indifference of things that have outlasted their purpose. Lights burned on the 3rd level of the main building. Torres had the layout. He walked them through it on the radio as the convoy positioned. The main floor, the secondary processing level, the elevated catwalks that ran the length of the structure above the furnace pits, the single operational freight elevator, and the 3 stairwells of varying accessibility. He has people, Torres said. I count 6 heat signatures on the 3rd level, 2 on the catwalks. One separated from the group, smaller room, east end of the structure, could be a command position. Draven, Lucien said. Most likely. She was in the 3rd vehicle again, Rafe at the wheel. She was not going to stay in it, and everyone present understood that. But the vehicle was where the plan started, so the vehicle was where she sat. Lucien came to her window before the team moved. She opened it. He looked at her for a moment in the dark. The waterfront was behind him, the smell of the lake, cold and vast, the city's light on the water. He'd had his coat back on since the estate, and she could see the faint tension in how he held his left side. When we're inside, he said, you stay with Voss. He'll move you through the secondary route to the east end of the structure while the main team takes the 3rd level. You're going to the catwalks. Yes. She looked at him. There were things she could say. She was aware of all of them. The accumulated weight of 8 days, and a dead father, and a bathroom floor, and the specific irreversible education of watching a man she had no clean word for move through the worst night she'd ever had with a kind of gravity that had reorganized something in her chest she wasn't sure she could reorganize back. She said, don't die. He held her gaze. Something in his face, not the controlled surface, not the compression, something underneath. Something that had been working its way up through 11 years of deliberately constructed distance and had finally, under sufficient pressure, reached the top. No, he said, like a promise he intended to keep not for himself, but because she'd asked. Then he moved. The main floor of the Kellerman facility smelled of rust and standing water and the specific mineral cold of industrial spaces long unheated. The freight elevator was offline. Torres had confirmed that before entry, which meant the stairs were narrow and steel and rang like bells under boots, no matter how carefully you placed your feet. She went with Voss through the secondary route. A service passage along the building's east wall, low-ceilinged, lit by the ambient glow from above, filtering through structural gaps. Voss moved with professional quiet, and she matched his pace and his foot placement and focused on the next 3 feet of floor. Above them, movement, voices, the particular sharp sounds of an engagement beginning, not random, organized, Lucien's team and the circle's people finding each other in the geometry of the 3rd level. Then a shot, then several, then the metallic ring of something hitting a catwalk. She moved faster. The east end of the structure was a room that had been a foreman's station. Glass walls partially intact, a door that still hung on its hinges, the bones of an old desk reduced to its metal frame. Through the glass, lit by a single work lamp plugged into a generator that hummed with domestic mundanity against everything else, Victor Draven stood at a folding table with a laptop and a radio and the posture of a man watching something he'd invested in. He was smaller than she'd expected. Medium height, slight, the kind of man who became invisible in crowds. His face was unremarkable in every way except the eyes, which had the quality of something completely without doubt in its own conclusions. He saw her at the same moment she saw him. He looked at Voss, at her, at the door between them. Ms. Vale, he said. His voice came clearly through the compromised glass. You should not be here. Neither should you, she said. He looked at the laptop screen. She couldn't see what it showed from this angle. Then he looked at her again. He's on the catwalks. I know. He's going to reach this room in approximately 4 minutes. He said it with the calm of a man who has calculated it precisely. You could leave. The east wall has an exterior door 40 meters down. Voss knows where it is. A pause. I have no interest in you. You had an interest in me 3 hours ago. That was operational. This is personal. He looked at her steadily. He is going to arrive in this room in 4 minutes, and one of us will not leave it, and I would prefer you not be present for the variable outcome. She looked at the man across the glass, at his unremarkable face and his quiet voice, and the generator humming beside him like a small domestic appliance. My father, she said. Something changed in his expression, barely. A fractional acknowledgement. Cooperating witnesses are a systemic risk, he said. I don't apologize for systemic risk management. He was a person. Yes, Victor Draven said, So are the people Moretti has removed from this world in 11 years of operations. We're all managing the same arithmetic, Ms. Vale. We simply draw our lines in different places. She held his gaze. You drew yours on my father. I did. No inflection, just yes. The admission of a man who had made his accounting long ago and was not going to renegotiate it in a steel plant at 1 in the morning. She heard footsteps on the catwalk above. The engagement on the third level had moved. She could hear it relocating toward the eastern end of the building, which meant Lucy's team had pushed the circle's people back, which meant the door to the foreman's station opened, not from her side, from the interior stairwell on the far end of the room. And Lucien came through it. He was breathing hard, the controlled, rapid breathing of someone who has been moving at high intensity. And he had blood on his knuckles and a cut along his jaw that hadn't been there an hour ago, and he was moving with the forward-leaning purpose of a man who has been pointed at this room for 11 years without knowing it. He stopped when he saw her. 1 second, just one. His eyes going from Draven to her and back, the whole geometry of the room absorbed and assessed. Draven moved, not toward the door, toward the table, toward something under the table. And she understood what it was before she fully saw it, because she'd learned in 8 days to read intent in movement, and his intent was unmistakable. She moved first. Not with Voss's weapon, with her body, across the threshold and through the door and into the room with the specific irrational commitment of someone who has decided that physics is a problem for later. She hit the table from the side. It went over. The laptop and the radio and everything on it scattered across the floor. Draven's hand came up with a weapon and she was too close to it. Too close to do anything useful, she was aware of that. She'd created a problem as much as she'd solved one. And then Lucien was in the room, and his hand was on Draven's weapon arm with the same leverage geometry she'd seen in the main hall of the estate. The weapon fired. Into the ceiling, plaster and something older falling in a soft cascade. Then Draven was on the floor and Lucien was standing with the weapon in his hand, and his breathing was very loud in the small room. She was standing beside the overturned table with her heart doing something that had lost its rhythm. Lucien looked at her. I told you to stay with Voss, he said. He moved for the table, she said. I saw. You were across the room. I was 3 seconds away. I didn't have 3 seconds. He looked at her for a long moment. His jaw was doing the tight thing, but his eyes were doing something else entirely. Something that had given up, in this moment, on performing control. Victor Draven was on the floor, disarmed, wrists being secured by Voss, who had come through the door behind her with the professional resignation of someone who had accepted he wasn't going to succeed at keeping her in place. Draven's face was against the concrete. He was breathing. He was alive. She looked at Lucy and at the weapon in his hand, at the specific quality of his stillness. Don't, she said quietly. He looked at her. Whatever you're about to do, she said. Don't. A long silence. The generator hummed. Outside, the sounds of the engagement on the third level were tapering. She could hear it winding down. The circle's people secured or fled. Lucien's team moving through the building with the systematic patience of a concluded operation. Draven, from the floor, said nothing. He lay still with the particular quality of a man who had made his accounting and was not going to beg. Lucien looked at him for a very long time. Then he looked at Selene. And something in his face, that armored, compressed, 11 years constructed surface, came apart in a way that was not dramatic, not loud, not the kind of breaking that announces itself. Just a man finally, quietly, putting something down. He handed the weapon to Rafe, who had appeared in the doorway. Get Torres on the federal contact, he said. The protected witness case was active. Draven's capture is a material development. A pause. Make sure the wire transfer documentation for the Veltran accounts is included. All 6. Rafe looked at him. You sure? The federal route, Lucien said. Yes. Rafe looked at Draven on the floor, then at Lucien. Something passed between them that was too long and too private for her to read fully. Okay, Rafe said. He made the call. The federal agents arrived at 3:40 in the morning. She watched Victor Dravin walked out of the Kellerman facility in handcuffs with the same unremarkable composure he'd brought to everything else. And she thought about her father, and she thought about arithmetic, and she thought about the lines people drew and what happened when those lines intersected with other people's lives. And she didn't have a clean conclusion to any of it. That felt honest. The steel plant burned behind them. Not the whole structure. A fire in the lower level that Torres had flagged before it spread, contained enough to not threaten the surrounding blocks, destructive enough to reduce the facility's operational infrastructure to charred metal. The waterfront air smelled of smoke and lake water and cold concrete. She stood outside the second vehicle, with her hands in her jacket pockets, and watched the smoke against the city's permanent, non-dark sky. Lucien came to stand beside her. They were quiet for a while. "The federal case," she said. "Your father's testimony was entered into the record 18 months ago. It's preserved." He looked at the smoke. "With Draven's capture and the Veltrin documentation, the case closes. His cooperation is acknowledged in the official record." She thought about that, about her father's name in a file somewhere attached to the right outcome 18 months after he died for it. "It doesn't," she started. "No," he said. "It doesn't." She appreciated that he didn't try to make it into something it wasn't. "You gave him to the federal system," she said. "You could have—" "I know what I could have done." "Why didn't you?" He was quiet for a moment. The smoke moved against the sky. "Because you said don't," he said. She looked at him. He was looking at the water. His profile against the city glow was the same geometry she'd been reading for 8 days. Sharp jaw, sharp eyes, the bone structure of a man built to weather things. But something in the set of it was different, lighter, maybe. The way a structure looks when it's redistributed a load it was never designed to carry permanently. "That's not a sufficient reason," she said. "No," he agreed. "It's not." She waited. "The federal route closes it cleanly," he said. "The witness record stands. The Veltrin network is exposed. Draven in a federal facility is neutralized as effectively as any alternative and with considerably less arithmetic on my side of the ledger." He paused. "Those are the operational reasons." "And the non-operational reason?" He turned to look at her then. Direct. The full weight of those gray eyes without the compression. "You came back inside," he said. She understood what he meant. Not just that morning on the terrace. All of it. Every time she'd had a door and walked back through it. Every time the geometry of the situation had offered her an exit and she'd chosen the room. "I made a phone call from a bathroom floor," she said. "That started all of this." "Your father gave you that number," he said. "He knew you might need it. He also knew—" A pause. "He knew what kind of person you were, that you'd know what to do with it." She felt the weight of that. Her father's hand pressing a folded paper into her palm at a dinner table 3 years ago, his eyes doing that careful, worried thing they always did, his voice below the conversation telling her something he couldn't say above it. "He was protecting me," she said, "even then." "Yes. By giving me the number of the most dangerous man he knew. He trusted my rules more than he trusted the official systems." Lucien looked back at the water. He wasn't wrong about the official systems. She thought about that. About a man trying to stay in the middle of two things that don't allow for middle positions. About the 48 hours he'd spent trying to reach someone who didn't answer. "I need you to tell me something," she said. He waited. "The night he called. The call you didn't take." She kept her voice even. "Do you think it would have changed anything?" The question sat between them for a long time. She watched his jaw. The small movement of muscle there. The quality of his silence, which was different from any other silence she'd heard from him. Not controlled, not compressed. Just the silence of someone sitting with something that has no answer that costs less than the truth. "I don't know," he said. She believed that. She believed it in the specific way she'd learned to believe the things he said, not because he was incapable of omission, but because she'd learned to read the difference between what he managed and what he meant. "Okay," she said. He looked at her. "That's all? What else would you like me to say?" "Most people want more than okay." "I'm not most people," she said. "And you're not going to get absolution from me. I can't give you that." She looked at the smoke and the water and the city behind all of it, patient and enormous and indifferent to the specific dramas happening at its waterfront edges. But I understand the shape of it. That's different from forgiving it. He was quiet. Is that enough? He said. And the question had something in it she hadn't heard from him before, something genuinely uncertain, the voice of a man who has maintained certainty as a structural element for so long that its absence feels like a missing wall. She thought about 8 days, about a bathroom floor and a black car through wet streets, and a kitchen counter at dawn, and the east garden wall in plaster falling from a bullet hole in a ceiling. It's a start, she said. They went back to the estate. The building had been processed, the operatives removed, the damage assessed, the immediate crisis reduced to the mundane work of aftermath. Mrs. Harwell had emerged from the safe room with the specific contained fury of a woman who had been confined against her preference and was channeling it into inventory. She walked through the main hall, cataloging damage with a notepad and a flashlight, an expression that suggested the building had personally offended her. Garrett and his sister were in the kitchen. The girl, her name was Maya, Selene had learned in the warehouse, just Maya, 22 years old and studying to be a nurse before 6 weeks of a different education, was sitting at the kitchen table with both hands around a mug of tea, and she was not shaking anymore. She had the specific stillness of someone who had processed the worst of it and was now simply existing in the aftermath, which was its own kind of work. Garrett looked up when Selene came in. He looked at her the way people look at someone they owe something they don't have words for yet. She sat down across from Maya. "How are you?" she said. Maya looked at her. Her eyes were steady and very tired and very young. "I don't know yet," she said. "That's the right answer," Selene said. They sat together in the kitchen while the building was cleaned around them, and outside the windows the sky was doing that thing it does before dawn. Not lightening, just becoming slightly less dark, the black acquiring a quality of depth rather than flatness, the first suggestion of a world with dimension. Lucien found her in the library. She'd gone there eventually when the kitchen filled with people doing necessary things, and she'd sat in the leather chair she'd sat in the first night and looked at the fireplace that was finally, at some point, going to be lit. The room was the same as every other time she'd been in it. Same shelves, same smell, same quiet. And she was not the same person who had first walked into it. And the distance between those two versions of herself was 1 week long and felt like a decade. He stood in the doorway. "Chen wants to look at your hands again," he said. "My hands are fine." Chen's opinion differs. She looked at her palms. The cuts were superficial, already closing. "Tell Chen I'll come find her in the morning." He came into the room. He sat in the other chair, the one across from hers, separated by the cold fireplace. And he looked at her with the gray eyes that had become, over 8 days, one of the things she knew how to read. "What happens now?" she said. "The Veltran network is exposed. The Circle's Chicago operation is over." He looked at his hands, the cut knuckles, the dried blood. "The organization I run contracts significantly. The parts that remain—" He paused. "I've been thinking about the parts that remain." "For how long?" "Longer than tonight." He looked up. "Your father wasn't the only one who noticed the difference between what I was building and what it had become." He just said it out loud. She thought about a man in the kitchen on the first morning, files spread on the counter, the weight of him. The specific way he carried things he'd decided he didn't get to put down. "You can put it down," she said. "Some of it." He looked at her. "Whatever you've been carrying that isn't yours to carry anymore," she said. "You're allowed to put it down." "My father's death," he said. "That's what you mean." She held his gaze. "That's yours. That doesn't go anywhere." She kept her voice even. "But the rest of it, the infrastructure you built around it, the empire you created because you decided you didn't deserve anything that didn't cost as much as the thing you lost." She paused. "That part is optional." The library was very quiet. The house around them had settled into its own particular nighttime frequency. The creak and sigh of an old building redistributing weight, the distant sounds of people finishing necessary tasks. "You've been paying attention," he said. "I work in diners," she said. "I've been paying attention my whole life." Something moved through his face. Not the fractional thing she'd been reading for a week. Something larger. something that required the full surface of him to accommodate it. It lasted only a moment and then it settled, but it left a residue, a change in the quality of the stillness. He looked at the fireplace. "I didn't answer his call," he said. Not the operational version, the other one, the weight of it, unshielded, sitting in the air between them. "I've thought about it every day since, what I would have said, whether it would have been enough." She didn't rush to fill the silence. "I think he knew the risk," she said finally. "I think people who cooperate with federal cases know the risk and do it anyway because they've decided the arithmetic requires it." She paused. "He wasn't naive. He just thought it was worth it." Was it? She thought about Victor Draven in federal custody, about a case file with her father's name on it, attached to an outcome he'd died to create. "Yes," she said, and meant it. Lucien looked at her. The fireplace was still cold and dark between them, but the quality of the room had changed. The particular change that happens when two people have finished saying the hardest things and found themselves still in the same room on the other side of them. "You don't have to stay," he said. "Chicago, this building, any of it." He said it directly, as he said everything. "Rafe can arrange something clean, new location, resources, security, until the residual circle connections are fully neutralized. You'd be—" "I know," she said, "but—" She looked at him, at the man across the cold fireplace who had come to her bathroom floor, not for her but for a dead man's debt, and had stayed for something else entirely, and had been losing the argument with that something else, she understood now, since approximately the second morning in the kitchen. "But I'm not ready to decide that yet," she said, "and you don't need to give me an exit strategy right now." She looked at the fireplace. "You could light that thing. It's been cold in here since I arrived." He looked at the fireplace, then at her. He got up. He found matches in the drawer of the side table. Of course there were matches. This was a house that had everything in its correct place. And he knelt in front of the grate with the same focused efficiency he brought to everything, and within 3 minutes there was a fire. He sat back in the chair. The light moved across the room in the specific warm way of firelight, irregular and alive, filling the shelves and the leather spines of old books and the angles of his face with something that had no strategic application whatsoever. They sat in the library in the warmth of the fire. Outside, Chicago was doing what Chicago did, existing with enormous indifference to the specific dramas of the people inside it, the trucks beginning their early runs, the lake moving against its shore, the sky finally, slowly, beginning its gray graduation toward light. She thought about a phone call from a bathroom floor. She thought about 3 words spoken into a cracked screen, "Please save me." She thought about all the things that phrase had contained that she hadn't known when she said it. Not just rescue from that specific night, but from the accumulated weight of every night before it, every compromise, every explanation she'd made to herself for why the situation she was in was tolerable or temporary or something she could manage alone. She had not managed it alone. That was true. But she had managed it. Selene Vale sat in a leather chair in a library in a house outside a city that contained everything she'd been, and she looked at the fire and felt, underneath all the cost of the last 8 days, something she recognized after a moment as the specific weight of a person who has arrived somewhere after a very long journey and has not yet decided what to call it, but knows, with the quiet certainty of exhausted bones and healing hands, that it is not nothing. Lucien looked at the fire. After a while he said, "Your father would have found this situation completely predictable." She almost smiled. "Why?" "He said you'd find the most complicated possible version of whatever you were looking for." A pause. He said it like it was a warning. "Was it?" He looked at her, the firelight in his gray eyes. "No," he said. "I don't think so." The fire moved. The city moved. The night finally, gently began its long concession to morning. And in the library of Blackthorn Manor, 2 people who had no clean words for what they were to each other sat in the warmth of a fire that had taken all week to light and said nothing more, because nothing more was required. And outside the window, the dark was turning slowly, irrevocably, into something new.